No, not just about, not quite, but the average is somewhat what it was. So picked out a line and it was the Georgia line.
Okay, great. So with that, I'll call the regular meeting of Township Council for, days of today, Monday, November 20th, to order. I'd like to begin, of course, by acknowledging that the meeting takes place on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, acknowledge our valued relationships with the Katzie, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. So with that, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda? However, I'm going to move it, removing item K1. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rent. So that's as amended to remove the reconsideration of K1. That, I'll call the question on A1. That carries unanimously. Adoption of minutes from the regular council meeting on November 6th. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, I'll call the question on B1. It carries unanimously. Public hearing meeting minutes from November 6th. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Seeing no discussion, call the question on B2. Carries unanimously. Delegation C1. Sarah, make it today? Yes, you are. Good to see you again. Please come forward. And I'm hoping you're feeling better. Okay, great. I'll turn that one on. There you go. So you could just introduce yourself and then generally where you live, but I think we're going to get your property address here in a bit, aren't we? Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, Council. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Sarah Beauvais, and in 2021, I purchased a home at 20709 39A Avenue in the Township of Langley. Together with my husband, Derek, we purchased this home for our family with the idea in mind and the layout of our property that an accessory building would be very possible. A house with a shop in Brookswood is quite common, and it was a deciding factor when we purchased. For the better part of 2 years, I've fulfilled the process it takes to acquire the go-ahead from the township to proceed with our project. we've hired an arborist to perform a tree risk assessment, 2 wastewater practitioners to sign off on our plans, multiple talks with the tree tech division and the permits and licensing department, and a driveway application. It has continued to be difficult, but we know this is the process we must follow. I've researched 5 surrounding municipalities and have some comparatives to share with you. In the city of Langley, there is no tree removal permit needed for any tree on private residential property. The city of Abbotsford is $300 permit fee per tree being removed. All of those fees are refunded when a replacement tree is replaced within 1 year. The city of White Rock is by far the most expensive at $3,000 per tree. But again, all of those fees, 100% of the fees are refunded when a replacement trees are planted. The city of Surrey is $99 for a tree removal permit and $38 per tree. And the city of Vancouver, which you'd think would be the least amount of trees in most of the Lower Mainland, is $276 per tree. I'm trying to understand why there is such a difference between other municipalities and the Township of Langley. For us to obtain the tree removal permit, it's going to cost us $37,500 for 17 trees. And just to put this into perspective, what that looks like is one would have to work for 1 year full-time at $23.10 an hour and not spend a dime. I work in nonprofit for subsidized housing in Langley, and that's barely less than what I would make, meaning it's next to impossible for me to afford these fees. The clear cut of trees for a development project a few blocks from us on 208 south of 36 would have a rough cost of about $4 million if held to the same standard as us, just for the removal fees. I'm here today to plead with council to waive the tree removal permit fee, as those fees alone attribute to approximately 40% of the cost to build the accessory building. I absolutely understand the importance of saving trees, and I also know that this community exists because trees were cut. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I hope that you consider this request.
And just want to be clarified, your request would be
Waiving the fees.
to waive the fees. All right, so that's a clear ask. Not seeing any questions of council. The button's not working. So go ahead, Councillor Ferguson. Go ahead.
I'm glad it got turned off, though.
Go ahead. Button's not working.
I
We'll look into
wanted to
that.
ask a quick question through to Ms. Bouvet. Thank you for coming today. Are these trees? I don't have
Just going to stop you for a second, Councillor Ferguson. Ms. Bauer, if you could have somebody look at this. None of the request to speak buttons are working. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to ask, are these trees, I mean, I live in Brookswood, too. Are these trees quite big, like tall, like way up there?
Some of them are, yeah.
And you don't have, like, I got a guesstimate of height and what they call as the diameter of the
I
tree?
do. We had the arborist report done, so they've been able to, the DBH, I guess, which would be over 30. So they're tall, yeah.
And I guess you've sent that in to our staff and they've determined
We
accordingly.
have actually been approved for the build. The only thing we were so excited to get the go-ahead to be able to do this, and then when we looked at the price tag involved, that's when I started doing the comparisons to other municipalities.
Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, do you happen to know what species they are? And it's not, it might sound like a weird question, but you know, some trees are very valuable trees and some trees are just scrub trees and are a pain.
I don't know, I know that it's all in our arborist report, and actually I don't even have the species in front of me, but I do have like I think it's like a 27-page document that the arborist gave specific to each and every tree that we wanted removed, and then also the ones that are even on our property, period.
Okay.
You don't have a picture of the trees, because I know when I met with you, you had some pretty interesting pictures. When you think of 17 trees, you might think of Stanley Park. But when you showed me the pictures, it certainly did not come across as an amazing collection of trees.
It doesn't come across as this massive forest by any means. I mean, I know it sounds 17 sounds like a lot, but like we have one cluster that's like three trees and like kind of growing out of one sort of hole. So that consists of 3.
So you didn't bring those pictures today?
No, I don't.
So
have
I could
those.
have staff distribute the arborist report to all members of council to have a look at that, just to give it some context. I think a picture here would speak 1,000 words, maybe 2,000.
Okay.
So I'll have that distributed to council.
Okay.
Okay.
And we did try to, I mean, it's a 1/4 acre lot. It's a typical Brookswood lot. We would have built on the other side, but that's where our septic field is. We can't build on top of that. So we're kind of out of, there's no other way to go.
Right. Great. Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Move on to item D1, presentation from Superintendent Marsden. How are you doing today? Come forward.
All right, thanks very much, Your Worship, for having me this afternoon, and good afternoon, councillors. I just wanted to give a quick quarterly update on the goings-on of the Langley detachment between July and September of the year. I was just going to touch on some of the statistics over that period and some of the more topical issues that we have going on in the detachment. So, I know that you all have a copy of the report, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions on it all the time. But so just to touch on the kind of highlights of the stats, in terms of property crime trends over that quarter, theft from motor vehicle were the most attended file that we had, as well as mischief to property came in close second. Vast majority of those files were theft from vehicles and theft under $5,000, a lot of which were related to catalytic converter thefts. To that end, we have been meeting with the Surrey detachment that's created a bylaw in relation to catalytic converters. So we have obtained that, and it's been a topic that we're kind of reviewing in our detachment to see if it might be something we could bring to the township as something for consideration for enforcement, but just something we have on the go to respond to the number of files we have.
Well, could you go back to that slide? That shows the
sure.
heat map. I believe
sorry.
that's a heat map that highlights Langley City quite nicely. With the next one or the previous one? That one there.
Sorry.
Just maybe a few minutes
Yeah.
to look at that. So could you explain that? What the basis is
sorry,
for the
sorry.
bright orange?
Sorry, so these are all the property crime files that we've had in the city of and the township of Langley or during that quarter between July 1st and end of September.
And that's based on quantity or the quantity of calls? Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay,
that's right.
great,
Yeah,
thanks.
sorry. In terms of business crime trends, for the Langley Township, the number one call that we had over the summer was shoplifting, and followed secondly by false alarms and causing disturbance calls. We think we probably drove up the shoplifting files just because we ran a project. We were having a number of issues with some of the big box stores. In fact, there's 3 business areas that contribute to about 50% of the shoplifting files we have. And that's at 19851 Willowbrook Drive, which is the Real Canadian Superstore, the Willowbrook Shopping Center, and then also a group of big box stores on 66th Avenue, which is the London Drugs, the Best Buy, the Walmart, the McDonald's. So we ran a project there, essentially taking a number of our officers out and tried to respond to all the complaints that we were getting from the loss prevention officers that work essentially catching the shoplifters in those businesses. So we tried to have a significant impact on it, and we actually did it in combination with a number of other jurisdictions. It was actually led by the Vancouver Police, and the idea was just to kind of drive home the fact that shoplifting is really not tolerated, and to just send a message in that to that. And we'll also be running a similar project again before Christmas. Similarly, there's just a more detailed list of the type of files we had in relation to businesses. Again, heat map for business crime trends, just showing Langley City and the township combined. Person crimes trends, just the number one type of files we attended were assaults, followed secondly by uttering threats calls, and lastly by harassment calls. And this is again where they're occurring. Just to kind of have a bit of a format for my presentations, what I thought I would do is kind of speak to the strategic plan. This might be interesting to some of you because I think this was almost my strategic plan that was created just before some of you actually were on the council. So just to reiterate what came out of that out of that plan were 4 areas that we were to focus on over the next 4 years. Number 1 was visibility. Second one was concentrating on persons experiencing homelessness and mental health issues. Number 3 was assuring that we're working effectively with our public safety partners in the most efficient, effective manner we can. And then lastly was to strengthen our capacity to respond to the growth and diversity in the community. So in speaking to those, in terms of starting off with number 1, which was visibility, over the summer, we reallocated all the school liaison officers to bike and foot patrols. So each number that you see here accounts for about a 2 to 3 hour patrol period of either foot or bike patrols. You'll notice a variance in the numbers by the area. I should probably point out that part of that reason is that bike and foot patrols are more effective in different areas. Obviously, like denser populations have much more effect if we're able to, bike through it constantly over a number of hours versus a certain area that's mostly just a highway, for instance. And also, I know you're going to notice the 0 in Aldergrove, but I'm going to guarantee that that's going up next time.
No, I was going to ask about that. I was waiting to the end of your presentation.
Yeah, but I one guarantee there, not only was I a little shocked myself when they gave me a report with a 0 on it, but also the Peter Mann is probably our star performer in the community liaison unit, and he's just transferred to that unit, so I can guarantee that number is going to vastly improve.
So am I reading that correct, that the City of Langley was 77 and Aldergrove was 7?
That's right, yeah. But again, it is to the effectiveness of the program, like a lot of the dense areas of Aldergrove are kind of up a highway, and then a small town area that we wouldn't get as many, value back in terms of the number of crimes we might discover doing foot patrols in that area, for instance. But not to.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of continuing on with visibility. Visibility. We ran another number of projects. First, there was a number with ICBC and our traffic section. We ran a Promote Hands-Free Driving initiative, which was essentially running a number of enforcement initiatives to combat distracted driving and cell phone usage. We also, when school was back in September, we started a Think of Me campaign. So essentially what we had some of the younger kids at the elementary schools write notes to the drivers that happen to be speeding through their school zones and putting their lives at risk. So rather than handing out speeding tickets, we would actually hand a note from one of the kids to the driver just to think about what they're doing, which we've found has been fairly effective. And then, of course, we've had a number of speed enforcement initiatives throughout the city and township based on accident stats and complaints from the public. We attended a number of community events, including the Aldergrove Fair, the Walnut Grove Community Park services, and then We also ran a Coffee with a Cop, which is essentially, we've essentially set up at a number of coffee shops throughout Langley for 2-hour periods, and we'll essentially buy somebody coffee if they come down, and they can come down and talk to us, ask us about any issues that they have in the community or anything they'd like to see from us, and it kind of gives them two hours of kind of free access to us to talk about anything they would like to. And then similarly, we also ran 5 nights for 2-hour periods at select locations where I and a number of other officers just attended for a couple hours again to get people that were working, were available at nights to come in to do the similar event. In terms of our second initiative, which is collaborating with the different social agencies and our partners within the community, one thing that we've done there is since June, we've had the Langley Interagency Frontline Table, or what we call the LIFT, and this is essentially a table that's put together to try to address people that are facing issues. So these could be people facing criminal issues, homeless issues, mental health issues, just any sort of thing that brings them into the problems in the social services or the police. And so what we do is people are referred to this program, and then we all meet collectively as a committee to address the person's situation and then try to get them back on track. So we've been running the LIFT table for a number of months now, which we feel has been very effective. So far we've dealt with 19 individuals. The last LIFT table that we put together involved 35 people, each representing different community agencies. And the last meeting we had, the RCMP contributed to about 7 of the 19 people that were at the table. Another program that we've been a part of is the Repeat Violent Offender Initiative, or REVOI for short. It's essentially a program that was put together by the provincial government, and it has the BC Prosecution Service, the police, and Corrections BC, and the whole idea of it is to deal with repeat offenders. So what will essentially happen is that any one of those 3 groups can identify a person who's become a recurring issue for the area, and once they're a part of this committee, they're identified to us, and that essentially means that they'll get special attention. So that could be enhanced intervention from community supports to help them get back on the track if they're homeless or what have you. But also they have a dedicated probation officers, they'll have specialized prosecutors, and then also they will tend to get a more focused enforcement from ourselves if they become a person identified to be somebody that we have to spend more time with. Currently, Langley has about 10 people assigned to that to this program. I recognize the casino is not in the township, but just in our overall efforts to combat money laundering and organized crime, we have joined an initiative to work with the local casino, BC Lottery Corporation, Gaming Enforcement Branch, and the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, which is essentially the gang units in British Columbia. The idea of joining them was to target money laundering, organized crime, and illegal gaming houses, and try to concentrate on housing that are taking away business from legitimate gaming businesses. Internally, so this is our fourth objective, which is essentially dealing with workplace diversity and the growth in Langley. So we kind of look at that 2 ways. On the one hand, we recognize that Langley's getting bigger and is becoming more diverse. So our goal is kind of internally to prepare our members to deal with a more diverse community. And so in that turn, we created a diversity and inclusion working group within our detachment. So the idea of that is to have a number of our members volunteer and create learning opportunities for our employees. So that might involve having a person from a certain ethnic background come in and talk to us. It might involve somebody from a certain sexual orientation coming to talk about their lifestyle. And in that way, we hope to educate our people and to better be able to respond to our clients when we have calls dealing with different groups in our community. Externally, we also have been involved in a number of outreach events. First was Boston Pizza was hosting a Special Olympics event, which our community policing group attended. We also attended Pride Day at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and there was also a Silver Pride event at the Langley Senior Resource Society. In terms of Truth and Reconciliation and doing our part in that, we have been participating in a number of events. This included Kwantlen First Nations version of the Amazing Race, which they put together for their community, and which we participated in and helped them kind of run the event for them. And then we also participated at the Stelu powwow, and they were nice enough to invite us to attend in Red Surge for that event. And lastly, things we have going on in our detachment, and the idea here is just to try to keep our members well and healthy and interested. And that's really just getting them to stay to work, stay positive, and keep up their morale. As we participated in a couple of things. One was that there was a Run to Remember, which is essentially a memorial to all police officers that have been killed in British Columbia, and it consists of 6 of our officers running 130 kilometers in a relay, and having an event at the legislature in Victoria in honor of those officers. And lastly, as we participated in the Proactive Response Support Team, or PSERT as we call it. This is an awesome program that the RCMP, I have to say, has developed over the last couple of years, where we send our members out for training, essentially to be ad hoc support after critical incidents. So if we have a shooting or other sort of violent incidents or a very traumatic incident, perhaps involving kids or whatever it is, our members will get to be able to sit down and be debriefed by some of our employees that have gone on this training. And it's something we're using quite a bit now, and it has been highly effective, I think. I guess I'll end there to keep within my 15 minutes. And I'm open for any questions.
Yeah, could you go back to slide 4 for me?
Sure.
This one here, number 4. Yeah, that one there. So, lots of good stats. I appreciate it. I did have a question, which I saw was flashed very briefly on the last slide. What is other go?
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a victim to the way the police database works. So they have categories, and in some cases, it'll be a conglomeration of a number of minor offenses that they dump into one big group. So that group of small offenses all kind of makes its way to the top of the pack. But the definition of other go is files involving federal offenses, obstruct police officer, uttering threats to property and animal, abandoned vehicles, check the well-being, insecure premises, Liquor Act inspections, or property found and lost. So essentially what happens is they can only make so many categories for all the different crimes. So there's a couple that get clumped together like that. Yeah. We just generally don't get too many calls of those.
And then false alarms, that's just what it is, right? That's a burglar alarm or some kind of alarm goes off and there's just no issue.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so when I looked at the math earlier, it was kind of interesting. So Langley City and Township, Langley City represents about 15% of Langley's population, but according to this slide, seems to represent 50% of its business crime. Is that roughly fair?
Yes, yeah. In that case, yeah.
So 15% of the population of Langley is generating 50% of business crime trends, and the other ones were plus or minus very similar within that range.
That's correct, yeah.
Just want to make sure I kind of have that right for everybody's information. It seems pretty interesting to me that it's that significant a difference. So how do you manage that when you have two municipalities where one is 15% of the population generating 50% of the crime, but only providing 30% of your membership?
So it's, as you know, essentially the districts are divided by a call volume. So the frontline members are divided by how many calls we would expect in that range. So some of the districts are bigger than others, so that it starts off there. So we would allocate a certain number of officers to that area, and then the rest are shared. So it is really for the plainclothes and the CPS and all the other support sections, they really move in a wave back and forth to wherever, you know, the particular calls of that day are. So yeah, they're shared. So
So it really wouldn't be controversial then to suggest that if the Township of Langley had its own members in the township, that our levels of service would go up significantly.
yes, I think it's fair to say that you would have more attendance, for sure.
And then slide 15, if you don't mind.
Sorry.
That's the casino one. I don't think I've seen sort of it put this way before. I was kind of interested in the, so that is an interesting issue. We have a facility like that, which I guess has some issues associated with it. Maybe you could explain those a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, all casinos have a certain element of, I think it's fair to say, money laundering and things like that going through them. Langley itself is a major casino, and so yeah, it's a part of really the whole, a recognized part of the kind of the whole organized crime facet within Canada. So it's because we have one, we're a part of that, and we contribute in like intel sessions, any information that might come related to the casinos.
It's an interesting one for me because we hear about, and I know we've been raising this issue for a number of years as a municipality, that the Langley Cascades Casino is less than 1 kilometer from the township border. We provide a disproportionate quantity of RCMP members. Would it be fair to say, and if it isn't, please say so, but would it be fair to say that Township of Langley is now additionally subsidizing policing at the Cascades Casino while it generates millions of dollars for Langley City?
Yeah, so I mean, it's fair to say we definitely provide policing services to it, and this would be another facet where we do. Yeah.
Okay. And at the bottom here of each slide, which I've honestly never read before, this, even though we're in an open council meeting, it says this document is property of the RCMP, may not be further disseminated, disclosed, reclassified, reproduced, stored, or used whole or in part without express written consent of the RCMP. So what would happen if I wanted to sort of expose, maybe that's the wrong word, maybe outline for the community some of these very real world issues with policing in the two Langleys? Would I be able to do that, or do I need to?
100%. Yeah.
I'd be okay with that?
I wouldn't bring anything to open council that I wasn't fine with you distributing.
I say it's good to do that. I appreciate that. So I've just asked for permission and I've just
Absolutely.
received it?
Of course.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Superintendent, for being here. You actually answered my questions in regards to Aldergrove as well, and I'm pretty happy to hear that Constable Man's going to be spending more time out there. Pretty excited about that. If there's anything else that we can do, obviously, in Aldergrove to make that zero go a little higher, I'm sure that everybody's here willing to do that. And yeah, thank you for adapting to the community that's changing so rapidly on you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councillor Martins.
Thank you. And thank you for Superintendent Marsden for being here today and for this update. Great statistics around, I think it was Project Barcode was the shoplifting project. Yeah, and I remember reading the Vancouver numbers as well. And shoplifting is a massive crime just in volume. So I'm sure those businesses really appreciated those efforts and that it's going to happen again before Christmas. So that's great. Couple of things I just wanted to mention. You're probably already aware of some of the initiatives that our council's working on that I hope will support the Langley RCMP and the work they're doing. One being the public spaces bylaw amendments, and I believe that that's being communicated over to you for your people as well, just to assist with some of those calls, a tool so that you can have conversations with people and move people along maybe where they're consuming drugs in places that might not be a great idea. So I'm excited about that one. And the mobile integrated crisis teams, recognizing Langley was not chosen in the last provincial announcement, and all the council unanimously voted to endorse advocacy to the provincial government to get that much needed service, and appreciate the efforts that you've gone to ensure the framework exists at your detachment. Another item that's coming up in our agenda package later today is the, with regards to the catalytic converter thefts. So I think the hope with that motion yet to be debated is to provide further support. I think maybe you could speak a little bit more about where you're at in those initiatives and maybe ways that the township can help you out as well.
Yeah, sure. So, where it sits now is so there is legislation like provincially on catalytic converters. Basically, all it really involves though is that somebody goes to trade in a converter, and the requirement is that they're supposed to give their name when they hand it in. The real problem with enforcement with catalytic converters is that they're not marked. You can't, if somebody steals a converter, if you're not watching them do that and leave the car, you've really lost your evidence. So I mean that literally. I mean, we can get a complaint of somebody having a catalytic converter stolen from their car, show up, and it can take us 30 seconds to get there, but we don't have proof that it came from that car. So it's a huge problem. And so the real goal is that if we can't get that through provincial legislation, is if any other way we can do it to kind of drive these thefts down. So I know that Surrey on its own came up with its own a bylaw, and my understanding is it's quite effective. It did decrease the number of people that were bringing stolen catalytic converters to their businesses. Of course, it raises the immediate question, like, just because Surrey doesn't do it, why can't they just steal and then come to Langley or some other jurisdiction to sell it? So I think my answer to that is that, I think if we work collectively in the Lower Mainland and kind of have a team effort, and that all the municipalities kind of get on hand, I think we could take a fairly big chunk out of that crime. I think that's kind of the focus of it.
Thank you. And then just one last comment. I appreciate I think it was your last slide about member wellness and the importance of that. And I guess my last comment is actually a request to staff. We've been waiting for a report back with regards to some improvements to the detachment, including a gym for members, that I think connects exactly with the points here and the importance of it. I was hoping to have it by now. I haven't seen it. And I think that's, I'd just like to raise that, something we need to look at sooner than later. If staff would be able to do that, so that, again, we as council can support your membership. I mean, we can look after you, so you can look after us. So, thank you very much.
Thanks. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, okay, things must happen in threes. Now, again, my first thing is, before I'm bypassing you for a second, through staff, was there an on-table item? Because I was looking at some people are referring to an item. Was that, because I didn't get an on-table item regarding your report.
You're talking about a copy of the presentation?
Yes, I didn't. It wasn't on my
Oh, it
desk.
should have been provided to you, for sure.
Huh?
It was in the drawers.
Oh, that's where it was in the drawers.
Council
okay.
drawers, yeah.
Okay, so I'll have to, next time I come here,
No,
before I get my agenda, I'm going to check my drawer.
I'll mention it to
That'll be
Natalie
the
as
very,
well.
very first thing I do.
Check the drawers at around 1 o'clock, and if there's still items in there, to hand them
I'll
out.
do that from now on. I'll be doing that.
Excellent.
I'll be putting a note before I check my agenda. I'm going to check the drawer, and also I'm going to check to see if my mic's on. So there'll be a third thing later on as well. Okay, if I may through the chair, thank you, Superintendent Marsden, for coming. I really, really appreciate. Always like your report. Always like, when I first started off, and people don't like to hear this. I mean, it was be 1/3 of the population was in the city. Now that the mayor has indicated 15% now. So, I mean, the interesting thing we've always said, we're looking at, the percentages and how, the more crime it should have maybe more police. I guess other jurisdictions feel that way, like Vancouver and Port Moody and a few others. I was wanting to ask on them. A lot of my questions have been answered, but on the casino when they came here, they haven't always been there, and would Port Moody police or Abbotsford police be called in to react if somebody was firing on people or doing something illegal at the casino?
I presume if you mean we had a major incident of a shooting or what have you?
Yeah.
We it's generally a huge partnership, I think, in the police community that every time we have something that people do pitch in to help each other.
Yeah, that's like protocols and things like that. So it's just like fire, I guess, if the fire, like one time there's a Value Village was burning down there and had a whole bunch of fire trucks from everywhere. And that might be before your time too. Value Village burning. Okay, so that, and also, if we have questions, when I do go to my drawer and get probably a number of things like my car keys and stuff. And anyway, if I have some questions regarding, I can certainly have your permission to ask you questions on your own report.
Absolutely.
That would be good. But it's always a pleasure. And one good plus, I call him the Sheriff Constable Peter Mann from Aldergrove. He actually was walking along with another constable, and he came in and see Veronica. Veronica was pierogi, 'cause I was buying there. The best pierogies in town. Veronica's pierogi on 272nd up close with Fraser Highway. That's a plug for Veronica. And yeah, there was a call, and they ran off, and they did their call, and then they came back again, and everything worked out well. So I wanted to put that plug in for Constable Peter Mann, doing a great job. Thank you.
Pass along.
Councillor Kuntz?
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I know that there was recently a really unfortunate incident south by the border where animal protection officers were involved. How often do the RCMP work together with the animal protection, and do they have the training that police officers do to deal with these kinds of situations?
To be honest, I'm not too familiar with their program. We
Okay.
definitely would use them all the time.
Oh, you do?
For,
Yeah.
For dealing with animals on the road, but it's just a
Right.
million
Okay.
different calls that we've had with the animals.
But not for like violent type of situations. I guess you don't never know what you're walking into, but
Yeah, it would strictly be to deal with the animals. It wouldn't
Right.
be
Right.
to assist us in policing.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There would obviously be a situation with an animal that they're dealing with that
So that
brings us to call
that
them.
was probably a one-off, that situation. That was where they were fired on and all that.
Well,
Sorry, I thought I maybe shouldn't have brought it up, but I just wanted to know, how closely the RCMP works with.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they're definitely one of our awesome
Right.
partners, just like
Okay.
the fire department and everybody. And it's just, so it just happened to be a call that went violent that they were a
Right.
part of. Just, if it was any other partner,
Right.
same thing would have happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bailey?
I see you recently did some renovations to the Aldergrove Community Policing Station. And I'm wondering, has it affected business as usual, shorter hours or anything like that?
It did close I'd have to check to know exactly what the status of it is now at the second, but it definitely did need to close for renovations while they fixed the wall, if that's,
Is
we're
it,
talking about the
it's
same thing.
up and running good now, though?
I'd have to check, to be honest. I don't want to give you a wrong answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Great, seeing no other speakers. I do appreciate you coming here today. Appreciate the information, especially the slide we've been staring at the last little while, put the
Okay.
issue back on the radar, so I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next presentation, item D2, presentation by staff regarding the proposed Housing Statutes Amendment Act of 2023. I suspect it'll be for all three items of legislation, not just this first one. Please come forward. Maybe introduce yourself for members of the audience.
Yes, Chan Cooner, Director of Community Planning and Policy.
Go ahead.
Give me a moment here to get the presentation up and running. And Your Worship, I'm here today before you, not by choice, but by pursuing to a council resolution. Just had to put that out there. And the resolution was on November 6, 2023, regular meeting. It was requesting a presentation from staff regarding the provincial housing statutes. And the council's resolution is on the slides before you. To paraphrase, the presentation is to include both the potential implications of the proposed provincial legislation and potentially a process for council to consider. And before you, you have the proposed provincial statutes. And prior to me speaking in depth about each bill, I'd like to step back for a second and just talk about the Local Government Act. So it is important to recognize the powers municipal governments do have in the Local Government Act. The Local Government Act does grant municipalities the authority to govern land use by way of zones. And by way of zones, a municipality can essentially regulate land use, buildings, density, sitting, size, dimensions, and even in certain circumstances, they can regulate tenure. So the proposed provincial legislation do result in a significant and historic change to the zoning process and actually the planning framework for municipalities within British Columbia. And the province has now introduced three pieces of legislation. More specifically, it's Bill 44, which was introduced on November 1st, 2023. Then there was Bill 46, which was introduced on November 7th, 2023. And the last and final bill, hopefully final bill, was Bill 47, which was introduced on November 8th, 2023. So each of these bills will make a number of amendments to the Local Government Act, which I will talk about in more detail later on in the presentation. Now let's start with Bill 44. Bill 44 does require that a municipality's zoning bylaw are amended in two ways. First, the zoning bylaw must permit either secondary suites or detached accessory dwelling units on every lot zoned for single family or duplex use. At least one additional housing unit must be permitted either within the detached dwelling unit or on a separate structure within the same lot. Secondly, the zoning bylaw must accommodate the housing needs for the next 20 years of population growth as identified in the Housing Needs Report, which would be consistent with the OCP. So council would be required to amend its zoning bylaws to permit use and density necessary to accommodate 20 years total of housing units to meet the projections in the Housing Needs Report.
So can you clarify that? Land would have to be pre-zoned to satisfy 20-year housing supply, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what would that be under the current housing needs report? How many units?
Your worship, just to clarify your question there, are you saying the housing need reports that the township currently has?
That's correct. This is the best we have at the moment. But yes, they are requiring we replace it. But in the current housing needs report, for 20-year housing supply, pre-zoning for how many units?
I believe I do have that number before me. Your worship, just give me a moment here.
Okay. We can just, may as well get that out while we're looking at it.
I'm going to take a quick stab at it before I locate it. I believe the housing need reports is a 5-year report that projected 6,000 units approximately. Just since this council has been elected, the approximate approvals in principle have been 5,900, I believe.
So the housing, so under this slide, I think it'd be important for council to note that this legislation would require us, within a certain time frame, which I'm sure you'll get to pre-zone for 24,800 units of housing.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay, carry on. Thank you.
And the zoning bylaw will then be required to update every 5 years within the issuance of, as I stated earlier, an updated housing needs report.
So we would have to have a 20-year rolling supply. So every 5 years, pre-zone an additional 5-year supply.
That's correct.
That's correct. Yeah. Thank you.
And then Bill 44 was released alongside materials by the provincial government promoting the quote-unquote missing middle housing, which is now being referred to as small-scale multi-unit housing. Small-scale multi-unit housing describes a range of buildings and housing units that are intended to provide attainable housing for middle-income families. The examples are on the slide itself. It's secondary suites, detached accessory dwelling units, triplexes, townhomes, or even quadplexes. Small-scale multi-unit housing is intended to be ground-orientated and is tended to be compatible in scale and form with established single-family neighborhoods rather than higher density would be. It's also intended to offer more of a family-oriented unit than larger-scale multi-family housing, and it is intended to be more affordable than single-family dwellings. We can assume that the specific details will be included in policy manuals that hopefully will be released sometime in December. But the form and content of the regulation is actually mostly unknown at the current stage. So we are speculating a few items within the presentation. As you can see on the slide here before you, this is a slide that was included in the actual technical briefing by the Ministry of Housing. Note the amount of units permitted in the left column and on the bulletin points.
Can you define, do we have a definition yet for permit 6 units on traditional single-family lots near frequent transit?
And Your Worship, are you seeking a definition for the 6 units itself?
No, the frequent transit. Do we have a definition for frequent transit?
I believe there is a definition for frequent transit within the legislation. I do address it, I believe, in a later slide.
Maybe
And I'll
I'll
speak
let
on-
you finish your presentation. Go ahead. Yeah.
As you can see, the province has indicated that the key proposed potential policy changes may include 3 units in single-family and duplex zones on parcels that are approximately greater than 3,000 square feet. I meant 3,000 square feet and less. 4 units on parcels that are greater than 3,000 square feet, which I believe, I have it on the slide there, it's 280 square meters. 6 units on family lots that are close to frequent bus services. And the proposed changes are to apply to areas within the urban containment boundary in the regional growth strategy. What that means is this does not include lands that are outside the urban containment boundary or lands located within the agricultural land reserve. Transitioning now to the next bill, which is Bill 46. I'd like to note that the key proposed legislative changes include changes to the DCC program, that's the Development Cost Charges program, and the introduction of amenity cost charges, which are referred to as ACCs. Development cost charges, proposed changes would update the scope of infrastructure eligible to be funded through DCCs, which would now include fire halls, police facilities, and solid waste facilities. Amenity cost charges are a new tool to collect funds for now community rec centers, recreation centers, daycares, libraries from new development. The proposed ACC program contains mechanisms that do ensure transparency and cost certainty for developers, local governments, and the public, which is much like the current township CSE program that we have. It is staff's understanding that the ACC program would essentially be replacing the CAC program. It is also very critical to understand that the amenity cost charges are to be collected at the building permit stage instead of final adoption for multi-family buildings, including some form of small-scale multi-housing. And the third piece of legislation that was released by the provincial government was Bill 47, which is related to the transit-oriented areas. So the affected transit development areas in the township may include areas within the 400 meters of Carval Transit Exchange and within 800 meters of the Willowbrook SkyTrain Station and Transit Exchange. Local governments will now be required to ensure that minimum levels of density, size, and dimensions, which will be established by the province in regulations, are allowed in these TOD areas. They will be removing parking minimums and allowing parking volumes to be determined by a need and demand on a project by project basis. Municipalities would have until June 30th, 2024 to designate these TOD areas.
Can you confirm what are minimum levels of density? Going to come to that?
It'll be in the next
There
slide.
we are. There we go. Thank you.
It's significant to note that for Bill 44 and Bill 47, there is legislation that's related to frequent transit. And to answer your worship's question, you may ask, what is frequent transit? Frequent transit is defined by TransLink as transit services that run at least every 15 minutes in both directions throughout the day and into the evening every day of the week. The township currently does not have any frequent transit by definition. However, bus rapid transit, known as BRT on 200 Street, that I believe was announced last week, would classify as frequent transit.
And there's a distinction between frequent transit and something like a transit exchange, which I see here on the slide, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So even though that would not have frequent transit to and from that exchange, it would still be required to have minimum densities within 400 meters of that exchange.
That is correct. Transit-oriented.
But just to clarify, sorry, so we have a bus exchange that does not have frequent transit, which will be required to have 400 meters of prescribed high-rise density without parking minimums. Is that correct?
That is correct, because you're creating nodes, and the nodes would technically continue to extend.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
And to further expand on that point, so transit-oriented development areas is defined as an area within prescribed distance from a transit station, and transit station are defined in the legislation to include bus stops. So as the mayor, your worship just indicated, it is possible that every bus station along 200 Street for BRT would be considered a frequent transit node. And the legislation would apply for higher density and no parking requirements.
Actually, disallows the township to set parking minimums would be a more accurate way to say it. Is that correct?
That is
We're
correct.
not allowed to establish any parking minimums.
That is correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
Here's one of the slides released in the provincial technical briefing. Again, the minimum allowable densities are not within the actual legislation itself. It is expected that the details will be forthcoming within the policy manuals released by the province at a later date. I may actually just go back to that slide and just leave it on the screen for just a couple more seconds. As you can see, rapid transit, prescribed distance, so if it's 200 meters or less, it's up to 5 FAR, so that's floor area ratio.
Maybe explain that.
So on the next column, you can see that if you have floor area ratio of up to 5, the minimum allowable height translates to almost 20 stories. So that would, the type of building would be expecting is a condo tower. And these are all minimums, meaning that it could be going above and beyond the established minimum density.
So something with 400 meters within the Carville bus exchange in every direction will be required to be 12 and above. Is that correct?
Potentially.
Potentially, with no parking minimums.
That's
no
correct.
parking requirements permitted. And the irony being that we would technically probably be considered a medium-sized muni along with Victoria and Kelowna, but because we're within Metro Vancouver, we're going to be classified as type 1. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
The timeline for implementing the legislation is as follows. 2023, the province is expected to give royal assent to all 3 of the bills, release the policy manual, designate interim TOD areas, and release TOD policy manuals. In 2024, the local government must, and I'm emphasizing that, update zoning bylaws to accommodate small-scale multi-unit housing. By June, designate TOD areas, remove minimum residential parking requirements by June, and update housing needs report by December. 2025, local governments must update official community plans and zoning bylaws based on the interim housing needs report by December. There is some extensions and exemptions allowed within the legislation. Staff's position is they are very minimal. The extensions, a local government may apply for an extension to comply with the legislation for a few reasons. One of them being upgrading infrastructure, risk to public safety, health, or the environment, and extraordinary circumstances. The exemptions would be for heritage lands, lands not connected to regional or municipal water sewer systems, as well as land parcels greater than 1 acre. These exemptions do require written notice to the minister specifying the land and the provision you will be relying on to entitle yourself to an exemption. Non-compliance is another. In the event the local government does not comply with the legislation or within the timelines proposed, the minister, with the approval from the lieutenant governor and council, may make an order that enacts or amends a municipal bylaw regarding density and use in a specific area, as well as the type of housing unit that will be required. The remainder of the presentation will now include some potential implications that staff can foresee. At a high level, the legislative implications can be summarized under the following 4 topics. One being infrastructure burden as a result of the increased density beyond the projected population. 2 would be competing priorities between council direction and proposed legislation. 3 would be public input challenges as a result of changes to the public hearing process. 4 would be challenges with future development because of blanket rezoning. I do note that these, as I stated earlier in my presentation, that the implications are speculative because the province has yet to release the exact policy manuals. That being said, the broad implications of this new legislation cannot be overstated. An area of staff concern is the lack of rezoning process to secure items such as land dedications, roads or even detention infrastructure, servicing requirements, the provision of parking, and the provision of density bonusing through our CSE program. These items currently occur at a rezoning stage as a condition of development. Without a rezoning, there is no clear way to secure these items. Considering the financial burden of infrastructure investments, there does not appear to be a cost recovery mechanism to upgrade the services in established neighborhoods. That's because development cost charges only pay for new growth, not redevelopment of existing communities. It is also likely that the transition from our CSE program to our amenity cost program could potentially cause a 2 to 3 year delay in the township collecting those amenity funds. And I do see Ms. Ruff rolling her eyes at this moment. This is a result because these charges will be paid at building permit rather than at final adoption. When considering the potential infrastructure burden and the associated cost, it is apparent that the provincial government needs to provide greater support and data to make it easier for local governments to understand the growth, population distribution impact of this legislation. And if the legislation leads to a population increase that is greater than our current population projection, there will be significant burden on our infrastructure. This would include our engineering servicing plans. We would need to update our engineering servicing plan for each neighborhood and community based on the updated population projections. We need to prepare engineering service plan, which is actually a significant cost and process for staff. For information, and one item we can use for an example is the Brookswood Fernridge Engineering Service Plan, which is expected to wrap up by the end of 2023. Similarly, the Williams Engineering Service Plan update is ready to start as soon as the neighborhood plan is finally adopted. So council may want to consider that the proposed increase in density may result in both those neighborhood plans, engineering servicing plans, having to be redone. And another challenge with unplanned potential increase in population is related to increase in park space, green space, and school site parks. For example, the park provision standards are laid out in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So therefore, any additional density beyond what is projected may lead to costly land acquisition to deliver on these park standards. The proposed legislation does introduce numerous competing priorities. We foresee staffing and resource challenges to fulfill both council priorities and implement the proposed provincial requirements. As mentioned before, we would be required to update our plans by the end of 2025. The proposed legislative changes would pull staff resource from some of the projects such as Willowbrook Community Plan updates, the Fraser Highway Land Use Plan. The challenge staff see is that in many cases, the timelines outlined will be insufficient to realize the scale of change to local regulations that is envisioned. It may be that the province should allow municipalities to develop a reasonable local implementation plan and timeline, consider the capacity of BC local governments, monitor progress, and maximize opportunity for a collaboration and shared resources. And another competing priority is the need to now balance new greenfield developments with redevelopment of established neighborhoods. Currently, we have been focused on developing our greenfield areas and providing the required infrastructure there. The township has a significant portion of undeveloped, quote-unquote, greenfield lands that is within the urban containment boundary, for example, in parts of Willoughby and Brookswood. The proposed legislative changes may result in redevelopment occurring in our established neighborhoods before it is anticipated. This would be a significant financial burden and require prioritizing which area is more important to address some of these concerns. We are also aware that the significant need for housing provision, as I discussed a few minutes ago, the challenges we see with our infrastructure, the township has also exceeded housing provisions, and those statistics were provided to your worship earlier. But the exact number is the housing need reports found that we needed 6,260 new housing units over 5 years. And I believe this report was completed in 2020. Since the start of this council term, 5,904 units have been given approval in principle, 20% of which are quote unquote the missing middle housing. Additionally, unplanned upzoning may have considerable uptake that may cause pressure on the existing infrastructure as well. And one item that we've already highlighted as well is that staff foresee parking challenges near frequent transit areas. Council's resolution asks for potential implication on bus rapid transit on 200 Street or 202 Street north of Highway 1. As mentioned earlier, the BRT would likely be the only frequent transit in the township, and the distance nodes around each BRT bus stop down 200 Street, in addition to the bus exchange. The legislation calls for no parking requirements within these areas. Do note that the transit-oriented develop, which is another item we have to take into consideration, is that the transit-oriented development areas may actually conflict with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's general traffic cap pursuant to Section 52, I believe, of the Transportation Act. So it's unclear at this time if MODI's jurisdiction would supersede the jurisdiction of the Minister of Housing.
So you're basically, maybe I could highlight it at the end because I have a number of questions coming, but I think it would be fair to say that the Ministry of Housing is bringing in legislation overriding decades of urban planning and a pretty solid housing creation plan here in the Township of Langley on greenfield areas. No apprehension, comprehension, or interest in how we could achieve it differently than Vancouver, demanding housing to the point of pretty significant measures such as these, such as no parking requirements. And then on the other hand, we might be hearing from Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that we're building too much housing, putting too much pressure on their infrastructure. Would that be fair?
That is a fair statement to make.
So we have the province telling us two different things simultaneously. Just carry on, that's fine. Yep.
Yes, and just to add on that item, is the Ministry of Transportation does require traffic impact analysis if you're 800 meters within an interchange. And the concern from a staffing level is whether the traffic impact analysis will put an impact on the infrastructure or the interchanges. That's one example.
That'd be fine. I mean, I'm not going to get into too much into conversations, but I was told at UBCM by Minister Fleming that the housing we were creating was causing chaos on their infrastructure. So carry on.
Continuing on, another implication is the planning process, which we have touched on as well. The legislation, as your worship has stated, may override years of community planning and public input. Under the legislation, a council must not refer a residential development to public hearing if it is consistent with the OCP, even if council does want to refer to a public hearing.
But can I clarify? So again, I think it's important to take our time with this. So prohibit local governments from holding a public hearing if consistent with an OCP that must be passed on an aggressive timeline.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the province's position is that the consultation already took place at the OCP stage.
The consultation, which is on an accelerated timeline for a plan that must be passed.
That's correct.
That's that correct? Yeah.
As mentioned, the OCP needs updating based on 20-year standards. This will include the school site, parkland, and road infrastructure required for the 20-year build-out. Not only does this take significant staff time away from competing priorities, it also does have a significant financial implication for council to consider. An issue which arises is that land which is zoned for more valuable uses, such as small-scale multi-unit housing instead of single-family detached, will be assessed by BC Assessment at its highest and best value. The result will be land that is pre-zoned to accommodate 20 years of population growth will bear a disproportionate burden of municipal property tax than otherwise would be the case. It is possible that the province views this result as a feature, since there will be an economic incentive in the form of higher property tax for a landowner to sell to either a developer or develop themselves. The last area of potential implications I will highlight is challenges for future development. Permitting small-scale multi-unit housing by right could significantly compromise some of our future development areas. For example, there are approximately 41-acre lots in Willoughby, so each of these lots is actually designated for a housing form that is higher density than the single family. However, under the provincial upzoning, a resident could theoretically develop a sixplex on their lot instead of moving forward with a 6-story wood frame apartment that is actually designated in the plan. In that sense, and the legislation is actually providing less housing on these specific sites than what was actually intended for.
And would we be in a position to prevent that?
Based on the legislation at this moment, without the policy manuals being released, it appears we would not be. Obviously, we are consulting with external legal counsel to get interpretations of the legislation itself, but as it's presented, it appears no.
So nothing would stop. I've seen the map. We should get that to council. I believe it's not quite finished yet. That shows the lots that are less than 1 acre within Willoughby. I'd like that done for Fernridge as well. Some of them, I think I recall, are up against 208 Street and 200 Street. So nothing would stop someone from putting a sixplex based on the setbacks I've seen right up against 200 Street. Therefore, then requiring TransLink 3 years from now, theoretically, of course, to have to expropriate these homes.
Correct.
Okay, great.
There is also environmental concerns that we anticipate. Pre-zoning to permit small-scale multi-unit housing is expected to intensify traditionally single detached neighborhoods over time, and as such will increase the impervious surfaces. This will likely have an impact on the township's tree canopy and make it more difficult to achieve regional goals and the target related to urban tree cover. It may be important for council to consider developing mitigation tools to reduce conflict between intensification measures and environmental goals surrounding impervious surfaces and tree canopy targets. We are putting the burden on council in that statement I just did, but we would have to see if any mitigation tools conflict with the legislation itself, or that the province is in a position to override us on those items as well when it relates to tree canopy or increase in impervious surfaces. Future development in greenfield areas such as Brookswood Fernridge may be affected also by these implications. As a result, if the population projections are expected to be significant based on the policy manual, which has not been released yet, it may require an update to the actual neighborhood plan. And developing a phasing program for implementation of small-scale multi-unit housing into greenfields would be likely necessary for council to consider. And as I'm concluding, the most significant and immediate challenge staff foresee is that if a proponent advances a single-family application in council, And once the subdivision is actually approved, there is no way to make the applicant follow through on the single-family development because higher density could potentially be an option under the provincial legislation. So the proposed bills 44, 46, and 47 do result in significant and historic changes to the actual planning framework in British Columbia. Some options that council may want to consider is suspending or repealing existing greenfield neighborhood plans, such as Booth, Rynn, and Fernridge, reconsidering new single-family subdivision development applications, and any other process council may consider after the release of the provincial policy manual. The enacting legislation will require historic level of effort on the Township of Langley with many technical and political questions that will require analysis and thoughtful consideration. That does conclude my presentation, subject to your worship's questions.
Yeah, I believe there's going to be some questions. Item number 1 on this slide specifically pertains to significant quantity of single-family within Fernridge, Booth, and Rynn neighborhood plans.
That's
That might
correct.
be the most pressing concern. So right now, if there are people purchasing property in that area or pretending to assemble property in that area or are contemplating putting in schools and other infrastructure to proceed with development, we may want to provide clear certainty to the industry that these plans are now potentially subject to a doubling of density. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially. And I think that's the problem. It creates a significant amount of uncertainty in what these areas could become versus what they've been planned for.
That's correct.
And is it irresponsible now to proceed with development of these areas when the planning department did, I believe, almost 5 years of work on everything from parkland per resident to the road network to environmental assessments, trying to create more parkland and more pervious areas, and prescribed a certain quantity of school spaces, which is now completely unreliable, I guess, to be a generous way of putting it, based on what the population could become in those areas.
There is potential risk associated with moving forward with some of these neighborhood plans and not taking into consideration some of the implications of this legislation that's being proposed.
And so I said to one of the other mayors last week, you mentioned timelines about achieving these things. I mean, it'll essentially require all other council priorities to be put behind these in order to meet these timelines. And even then, you're not sure you can meet them. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I just put that slide before council right there. So 2023, there's expectations. 2024, there's expectations, and 2025. So that
And it's not December; it's June, right?
That's correct.
That's correct. Yeah. So just a complete massive overhaul of single-family zoning in the entire township of Langley in a matter of months.
That's correct.
I mentioned to another mayor, like I said, I'll finish that story, last week. I said, I don't know about your municipality, but in some cases, it takes a year to get a report to council that that I want, let alone one that I don't want. And I'm not seeing the capacity. So do you have any preliminary thoughts while you review the legislation on how you would even potentially meet these timelines?
The preliminary thoughts are there's issues with staffing resource to accommodate some of these tight timelines and still balance it with council's priorities. So we would have to try to do a balancing act, but it's still too early to tell whether we would be able to even balance some of the council priorities and to meet the timelines of this proposed provincial legislation.
The other challenge being that if the Township of Langley looked at its entire greenfield areas from Willoughby to South Langley and determined that there was going to be a significant mixture of housing types, which is what I believe we've been asked to do, from apartments to townhomes to duplexes to quads, which are permitted on larger lots in Brookswood, that now this has been completely upturned. So if we had determined based upon access to infrastructure, Highway 1, BRT, for example, there was going to be a focus on the 200th Street corridor from Willowbrook to Highway 1, and then allow for more gentle densities, single-family forms, and a lower form of density in some of our southern areas where maybe the infrastructure is not going to be there. They're not going to have the same school capacities. Even Willoughby's struggling with that. Now that's been completely overturned. We're not able to determine that some areas are going to be lower density while other areas are higher to create an overall mix within the Township of Langley. That's been completely subverted, essentially ruined.
There's a blanket pre-zoning that has now been set, so we have to almost do reverse planning based on that.
So we would be better off in some areas to say that this could potentially be the end of the brand-new single-family subdivision and have to replace them with something else in order to meet the goal of providing certainty of what they will become. That's the only way to provide certainty now, is to simply not use the single-family subdivision any further based on this legislation.
And the single-family designation would be inconsistent with this provincial legislation, so now that is a concern staff see.
And it's important to note that may be the province's goal. They may wish to see the end of the single-family subdivision, regardless of the situation in the Township of Langley and the range of housing types that we were creating. You mentioned bus rapid transit. So if a member of council decided that it no longer wanted to support bus rapid transit based upon the imposition of these rules, that's certainly an option. Is that correct? We could revisit the decision around BRT.
That's correct. It's the will of council with respect to that.
And I think that that's the challenge, that this legislation has grown over time to the point where now the ironic situation that we're in is the more transit that we're successful in securing through advocacy for years is now undermining the right of this community to determine what this community will become.
And based on some of the decisions that were all made prior to the actual legislation or policy manuals being released with respect to some of the transit and TransLink releases.
Yeah.
So
And
that
then-
wasn't taken into consideration potentially when certain members of council or mayor were supporting TransLink.
I think it's important to highlight that that process, you know, I want to also highlight for all members of council that we were successful at Metro Vancouver in having Metro Vancouver request and demand almost, but they don't demand anything, but pretty much highlight that an exemption was an order for Surrey and the Township of Langley based upon the significant undeveloped areas, which no other municipality in Metro Vancouver is dealing with on the same scale. They're all mostly built out. And that request for that exemption via Metro Vancouver, unanimously voted in favor of by the board, was not considered or was not granted. And so there may have been an expectation that that may have carried some weight, which apparently it did not. And so now we're in the situation of dealing with this. So how would the Township of Langley meet a 20-year pre-zoned land supply, housing supply, if we're unable to use greenfield areas to meet that requirement, based upon the lack of a rezoning process would not allow for parks, schools, roads, greenways, bike lanes. So if we're not able to use greenfield to meet a 20-year housing supply any longer, would it be true that the only alternative left would be to pre-zone established areas?
That's correct. It would be the quote unquote what we call the brownfield areas, the established neighborhoods that would then have that blanket pre-zoning done to them.
Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. Notwithstanding the several legitimate kind of concerns that a lot of us have with how the policies have come about, feel that there's probably been a lack of consultation with the most affected communities by this policy and by these pieces of legislation. Did have a few questions, and I kind of wrote them down as I went, so I apologize if I can't find them right away. Discussing Bill 44, when you mentions permitting a secondary suite or a detached accessory dwelling unit on every lot zoned for single family or duplex. I'm assuming that's only within the urban containment boundary, is that correct?
That is correct. I believe the legislation itself reads that they have to be within urban containment boundaries connected to local water or municipal sewer.
And would there be anything that precludes a resident or a developer now on basically any urban lot from applying for a rezoning to an existing zoning bylaw within the township's bylaws that would permit them from putting in a suite? It might not be approved by council, it might not be approved by staff, but there's nothing that would stop them from actually applying. Is that correct?
There's current zones that do not allow the secondary suites pursuant to the zoning bylaw. In that event, if the applicant believes that they would like to rezone the property to allow for a secondary suite, they can make an application to rezone with several conditions that may be attached to it. And then it's up to the will of council whether that rezoning is successful.
Right, so the big concern obviously is that even though people can already do this, and this legislation doesn't just create a new allowance per se, the challenge is that it's now taking it out of the council's hands or staff's hands of really having any say on what the form and character of that suite looks like, or whether or not it actually passes in general. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just another item I'd like to add on that is the rezoning process is the process that allows us to attach the conditions. So it may be that there's several conditions attached to that rezone, which may be that minimum parking requirement, land dedications, statutory right-of-ways, easements, upgrading the infrastructure that's presently available to the area. Yeah. So that is stripped away when the pre-zone does occur.
When somebody tries to build a basement suite, say in Murrayville or Walnut Grove or Willoughby, one of the areas where you might be able to, or put a coach house on the top of their garage, are there parking requirements for those types of accessory dwelling units being added? Or are people typically having to park, on the street 12 blocks away or on a gravel patch next to the garage?
It would be dependent on the zoning bylaw they'd be seeking or the rezone they'd be seeking. So I don't have every zoning bylaw memorized, so I cannot tell whether that zoning bylaw would have some parking requirements there.
And do we, in the township of Langley, do we still have illegal suites, or have they all been legalized? Do we know? I can't remember. Because we still have some, townhouse units. We have some single-family units that technically don't have the suites permitted, but they're still there. Is that correct?
I'd have to get back to you on that, Councillor Pratt, just to get the exact whether. Are you referring to if there's any legalized suites currently in the township, like the stats on that, or if there's any illegal suites?
I'd be curious to know how many kind of suites we have an idea of that are legal versus illegal and how many there are, because obviously even if they're illegal and there's people still living in them, they're still using up valuable parking space. And so I'd just be curious to know, because by the sounds of how this policy is going to impact the township a lot, is it's going to be effectively legalizing a whole lot of potentially illegal suites where people are already living. So I'd be curious to see how that legislation would impact us there. The small-scale multi-unit housing, there was the fourth announcement by the province that kind of laid out potential pathways forward on almost pre-approved designs for a lot of this smaller-scale unit housing and how it might fit into each size of lot. It's pretty still early days, but do you know approximately if there's units that they're proposing that are actually above 3 stories or really out of context with the single-family character of a neighborhood?
Through your worship to Councillor Pratt, I believe what you're referring to is the policy manual that was released on Thursday or Friday.
I believe, yeah.
I think staff right now is currently reviewing that and will be providing an update on that, so I cannot comment at this time regarding that.
Right. So, and we don't necessarily know at this point, right, if they're going to say, okay, you're allowed to go up to 6 stories for a sixplex, or you're allowed to cover the entire lot, right? Because they announced that there are going to be setback rules and different regulations that they're going to bring out. Is that correct?
So your worship to Councillor Pratt, that is correct. It is early to tell that it's policy manuals that are being released. Staff is basing it off the legislation and the policy manuals that have been released to date. There's still additional policy manuals that potentially may or may not address some of these concerns. But yes, it's an ongoing communications with the province regarding the release of some of these policy manuals.
And I know it's still early days, obviously, for staff reviewing everything. Do we know vaguely how many other jurisdictions around the world or in North America have policies similar when it comes to the small-scale unit housing, and what the result of those have been?
Through your worship to Councillor Pratt, I believe, off the top of my head, it was New Zealand they were referring to. The province was making a lot of indication that New Zealand was kind of the test grounds, and they're using that. Granted, we do have to take into consideration that the township of Langley is primarily a greenfield development area as well, that some of these areas that maybe in the world be more established brownfield development areas. And what I mean by brownfield is that they already have the infrastructure, they're already established neighborhoods that are now older buildings that are now being rebuilt. Mm-hmm. So it's not one size fits all is kind of what staff is looking at it. Is there another city in the world that has happened and is identical to township? Yeah. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, because I could sort of see 2 different streams of challenges with these types of policies, where in the greenfield, I could probably agree with most members of council that it's going to be extremely challenging in the greenfield areas to, imagine approving single-family subdivisions knowing that all of a sudden they're going to be potentially sixplexes. However, in the brownfield area, I'd be curious to see just what the uptake in other jurisdictions were for policies like this, because it's how hard it is to build a 6-story building with multiple units. The pro forma, I'd be very curious to see how well it works for these smaller scale units and how many of them are actually going to be built, because you know, the other part of it is I would be curious to see what the potential property tax implications would be. Obviously, if now all of a sudden neighborhoods, which have been typically single-family units, one dwelling unit on a property, now there's multiple units, that's multiple property tax rolls. How is that going to impact the ability to pay for the infrastructure that we need to put into those neighborhoods? What's the latecomer system going to be like? There's all those questions that I think the province still needs to answer, but I think also I'm a little bit more optimistic in the sense of for those brownfield areas, I'm not anticipating a huge amount of delay or a huge amount of uptake right away. And then with the BRT project, specifically thinking about the Carvolth exchange, what was the timeline potentially on completion of that project? Was it in around about the completion of SkyTrain?
So I believe, as you can see in the screen before you there, let's jump to 2024. So we have to designate those TOD areas, which will be Carvolth and SkyTrain areas, and remove minimum residential parking requirements and update those zoning bylaws by June of 2024. And then in those areas, they have released this policy manual as well at the technical briefing, which shows once you designate those TOD areas, this is the prescribed distance, the minimum allowable density, minimum allowable height, and the type of building.
So assuming that BRT is supposed to arrive within 2027, 2028 timeline, this policy as it applies currently applies to Carvolth in its current state, even without BRT. Is that correct?
Currently, the frequent transit, there is no frequent transit currently pursuant to the definition TransLink has provided.
Right, okay.
So, however, BRT or rapid bus transit was announced. Therefore, now it's a matter of, do they interpret that as you have to pre-zone these areas? So that's another question we need to ask and clarify as well. It's a valid point you're bringing up. When we may not receive that support, for example, SkyTrain station, we may not actually see the station for 5 years, 10 years, but now we're pre-zoning these areas. Is the expectation that it occurs now or within the timeline that's provided? Those are definitely discussions staff would need to have with the provincial government or provincial staff.
Yeah, it'd be
so
definitely worthwhile.
Those conversations actually have been occurring even this morning. So we've been told that BRT, there's not required to pre-zone until the until the service is there, until the SkyTrain station is there. And so it's more in regards to the FTDA at 200 Street Interchange and the Carvolth bus exchange are the current liabilities that are within proximity to that bus exchange, because of their definition of bus exchanges, regardless of how much service it has, within proximity to that, there's a requirement to designate for 12 stories.
And so assuming that we have got the pre-zoning in place for up to a minimum of 20 stories or up to a minimum of 12 stories in the proximity of those frequent transit areas, do we know vaguely within the township's kind of pipeline of an application how long it would be projected to take off of that timeline from application made to fourth reading given to building permit issued for a tower of any magnitude? Because I'm wondering, say with the towers that are going up now, how long that process was and how long a rezoning application being not required would take off of that process. Do we have any kind of insight onto that? And if not, I'd be very curious to see what that would look like.
Through your worship to Council Pratt, yeah, definitely I can get back to you on that to provide some timelines and coordinate with development services to see and also the problems as well, because that's another question we would pose from a staffing level is the pre-zoning itself, how does that look like? Is it that the zoning bylaw is now amended and it's in place, meaning that they're not going through any rezoning, there's no rezoned and the third reading's granted and final adoption? Is it that basically that is a zone of the land, right? So that's definitely some items we have to take into consideration and see the implications of that and how that looks like, yeah.
Yeah, because I'd be curious to see, right, even if a tower was applied for tomorrow, I'd be very, very interested to see if we actually see a tower in there before BRT is actually in that position, right? And so it's kind of the cart before the horse, right? If we're building towers and there's no rapid transit, it doesn't make sense. But if we have the rapid transit there, that's when the justification for density becomes a bit stronger. So I appreciate you sitting here and taking all the questions and giving us the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to highlight that there's differentiation between pre-zoning required in Bill 44 and designations required by Bill 47. So there's a requirement to pre-zone 20-year housing supply, with no prescription on where that occurs. When in Bill 47, there's a requirement to pre-designate on updated community plans to allow for that density within proximity to the Carvel Transit Exchange with a prescribed timeline and how must be done. But then when it's done, we won't allow a public hearing because the community plan is where you had your input. You couldn't come up with a more contradictory process if you tried. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I was, got a guardian angel came by and brought your report on my desk, and that miraculously appeared as well as the RCMP.
It wasn't miraculous. It was Natalie that dropped it
Oh,
off. for
thank you. Why,
Yeah.
I thank you very much. Anyway, don't forget number 3 is coming soon. You've given us a report. Hopefully you'll be able to, if we have some questions, we can email you, or Mr. Cooner, thank you for coming, email you and ask and answer the question as best you possibly can. There's a number of challenges that we all have, and this is significant. I think this is probably one of the most significant changes in municipal government since I've been elected. So this is certainly something that's going to have an awful lot of questions from the council, as the mayor has, and as Councillor Pratt as well, questions, everything from environmental. My question would be very quick. I'm looking at things like working with the province. It's a provincial responsibility, things like schools and school districts and responsibilities for building them. Has that come up at all during your discussions, if I may, through a chair?
Your Worship, to Councillor Ferguson, we will be reaching out to the School District 35 to speak about this legislation and the impact it has on school sites and coordinating with them as well. Well, it is early on. We haven't had the discussions in depth yet with different levels of government regarding the legislation.
Okay, and then my next question, and I'm not going to have a lot of questions because I hopefully I'll be emailing you, and I'm sure other members of council have questions as well. I mean, have you had a chance, or your staff had a chance to talk to other communities, Coquitlam, Abbotsford, for example, same size communities or similar problems, about what they're thinking, what's going on with these particular reports or these particular statutes?
Through your Worship, to Councillor Ferguson, staff are having high-level discussions with different neighboring municipalities on these. Even at a Metro level, Metro is providing some early feedback and preliminary comments. They will, as this progresses, there will be more in-depth discussions with not just only neighboring municipalities, but Metro Vancouver as well, and Metro Vancouver staff to see what the actual implications look like and how this actually will unfold.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the fact we've had staff do it as quickly. I know you didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this, so thank you very much, Mr. Cooner, for coming. You know, the one thing that always comes up all the time, either election time or during our governing time, is the fact is the transparency and actual public opinion on and public consultation on many items, from zoning, rezoning, development permits, and the like. And sounds like that particular very valuable part has been missing in this particular initiative. Thank you.
I'll say, yeah. Councillor Martins.
Thank you, and I appreciate the comments of the other members of council here today. My question's nowhere near as in depth or technical, but just to talk about the Carvel in relation to the 200th Street interchange and the 202 underpass, which is currently a complete dog's breakfast when it comes to traffic, especially at peak hours, evening rush hour in particular. We couldn't even get to the HOV lane to use the HOV lane to actually get on the highway. The traffic's backed up so badly. I know you touched on it. I would just ask if you could clarify again. So I feel we've got some conflicting directions here from two different ministries, because on one hand you've got housing wanting to fully densify an already problem area with regards to the infrastructure of that underpass, the on-ramps and off-ramps of that exchange and the actual interchange. It's just ridiculous. And I know there's the 800-meter restriction currently. So when and how, or will we receive any sort of clarification on which one trumps what? Because if this supersedes the highways, will have a very profound impact for people in North Langley trying to move around, which is already difficult at the best of times. So can you just clarify again? I know you talked about the transportation.
Through your worship to Councillor Martin, yeah, that is correct. So currently, I believe it's Section 52 of the Transportation Act requires approval from the ministry for developments within that 800 meters of interchanges.
Yeah.
I think there's other language being used. I don't have that section before me here. So in the event there is higher density being proposed along, let's say 800 meters within the interchange, will the approval be then required by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure? And what happens in the event the approval is not given? Which ministry now has the authority? The ministry, MODI, does, as we'll see in the Williams plan, in the event that's given third reading, we do require MODI approval for that. And the approval requires staff to prepare a traffic impact assessment report and send it to the province. So that in the event they believe that the traffic impact assessment is not to satisfaction or believe too much density is proposed, they can always not approve certain developments or neighborhood plans. So, however, if the Minister of Housing has now already, let's say, designated it for a certain amount of density, we'll see how that unfolds, but there has been no further discussions on that. In the event that scenario does transpire, how do we handle that situation? And what ministry is going to have the overriding jurisdiction on that?
Yeah, no, thank you, because it's kind of a case to me of the left and the right are not aligned on this, and I'll say it again, that will have a very profound impact for the people living in that neighborhood, very badly, and I'm hoping that this council is going to work some way to advocate for those people, recognizing the difficulty that already exists living there, let alone all of this. So,
Councillor Bailey?
Yeah. This weekend I was over talking to a lot of government members at the BC NDP convention, and it was brought up to me that Portland, Oregon, has utilized this similar strategy. Am I correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Bailey, I think they might have mentioned that in one of the presentations, but we haven't. It's not coming back to the top of my mind. New Zealand was the primary one they're trying to focus on.
Well, the reason I ask that is because now I'm also hearing that Portland is going away from that strategy because it's not working very well. So I wonder if we could have a look at Portland, Oregon, and see if there are similarities in the approach by the provincial government, and if so, we might have some kind of experience rating going on. I'm sitting here listening to this, and I know right now that there's a very severe skills and labor shortage. I'm wondering how the hell they're going to find all the people to build these structures. What do you think? You think this is even possible that they're going to be able to cram stuff in like this because they can't build what they've got going right now?
Through your worship to Councillor Bailey, it's a pretty loaded question, but the focus here, it appears, is they're focused on the actual approvals and the pre-zoning, whether the actual development occurs. I think it's a whole separate discussion.
Yeah, because I'm looking. I hear 6 structures, 6 individual houses or living quarters on a single family structure, and they're going to come up with now some cookie cutter designs, are they?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So I'm kind of curious. I go back to my background regarding safety and how they're going to accomplish this kind of stuff in a safe fashion when you're putting that many more people on a residential road that is designed to handle single families instead of 6 single families. So I'm looking at an awful lot of implications here dealing with safety. And when you're talking about brownfield, we're having trouble finding spaces for infrastructure right now. But if you're going to have people building out like this, it's going to get incredibly difficult, but also incredibly expensive if everyone starts ramming 6 structures onto a single-family lot.
Through your worship to Councillor Bailey, that is a valid point, and hopefully some of those concerns may be addressed in this policy manual that's going to be released. Too early to tell at this time, but that is definitely a risk that's presenting itself.
Yeah,
Yeah, just to go a little further, because right now we hear a lot of concerns about people with crowding on streets, and going back to either police or fire experiences on these. When you start throwing that kind of densification on there, especially since it's designed to be missing middle, a lot of that missing middle is going to have families. So you're going to have potentially an awful lot of kids on streets that are not designed. Some of them don't even have sidewalks, and this is going to have a real dangerous implication to personal safety.
I wanted to add along those lines. Last week, I think there was a conversation. I asked the mayor, Surrey of Surrey, how many units do you have approved that aren't being built? 25, 30,000. Here, we're at about 6 or 7, I think I understand, maybe a little more. So between the two greenfield communities in Metro, we have almost 35,000 units approved that aren't being built. Yet somehow Langley and Surrey are the problem. Councilor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, just through your worship. At the beginning of your presentation, you had kind of led in with the Provincial Act giving municipalities jurisdiction over zoning. Can you elaborate on how these bills fit in with that current policy within the Act? Is it in conflict?
Through your worship to Councillor Van Popta, so what is being proposed right now, the 3 bills are amending that Local Government Act, and within the amendment, the legislation are basically a framework, and the policy manuals are intended to fit the missing pieces of that framework or fill in the framework. So they've amended the Local Government Act to allow now the province to provide certain policy manuals that will basically address some of these items. Like, for example, the legislation, Bill 44, does not expressly state 6 units for a single-family lot. That's a policy manual, and they've now amended that Local Government Act to allow that policy manual to fill in that blank. So they're basically giving enough leeway to the ministry and the province to provide these policy manuals, which are going to come at a later date, that will fill in these gaps.
But now they're prescribing actual numbers, 2 to 6 per single family lot, dependent on the size. So that, to me, that sounds like they're actually prescribing what goes within our zoning for single family. So it sounds contradictory. Or have they just completely abolished the ability within the existing legislation for us to be able to control our own zoning? Or is it in like, I'm just trying to figure out if it's in conflict. Like,
through your worship to Councillor Van Popta, so they have amended that Local Government Act. They've are now not allowing, I wouldn't say, the actual power the Local Government Act's on the zoning process has been amended. Therefore, they are stepping in and prescribing certain density. So that is going to be overriding essentially the local government's power on that item.
okay, thank you.
Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, so we've talked about the Minister of Transportation, the Minister of Housing. Has the Ministry of Education come to the table, and what are they saying?
Through your worship to Councillor Kuntz, to my knowledge, we haven't had any discussions or presentations from the Ministry of Education. There hasn't been any technical briefing. To my knowledge, it may be, but there hasn't been any staff discussions with the staff at the Ministry of Education as well.
Okay, thank you.
And to add to that, in Willoughby alone, I think it's fair to say we're 5 schools behind, 3 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high at a minimum, maybe probably more elementary. And we haven't seen an announcement for a new school in years. Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I forgot one question, and I'm actually glad Councillor Bailey brought up Portland, because I forgot about Portland. And I think one of the things that Oregon did right when they announced that policy was they gave cities 3 years to come up with the actual land use policies required to implement their effectively very similar policy to what we've just announced. And since the city of Portland enacted theirs 3 years ago. They've seen, I think, only 127 in the entire city of Portland, and 97 of them were granny suites, secondary suites, or coach houses. So I think it's a good context to have because it's very similar policy. But they gave municipalities a lot longer, which I think is what my hope is, that they can come to some kind of compromise here. In brownfield areas specifically, is the province giving any indication on whether or not they will be overriding existing policies such as tree protection bylaws or mechanisms like that don't necessarily impact form and character of buildings themselves, but impact the siting of a structure or what can be done on a lot? Is that type of legislation going to be eliminated as well from the province?
Through your worship to Councillor Pratt, we haven't had any technical, it's not in the legislation itself. We haven't had any technical briefings or any policy manuals that deal with that specific item at this time. Staff are just speculating and are just indicating to Mayor and Council that a lot of these items are secured through the rezoning process itself. So we're assuming that that a policy manual may not address this. Therefore, the control is taken away from the local governments to try to mitigate some of those items.
Yeah, definitely a lot of challenges coming forward. Appreciate it.
Yeah, in that one, there's, if I recall, specific language in the legislation that prohibits local government from passing bylaws of that nature for the sole purpose of subverting their rights to put a 4 or 6 unit building on their single-family lot. So it would be up to the regulations or the opinion of the province whether or not tree protection was being implemented for the purpose of subverting those rights.
That is
Protection, yeah.
correct, Your Worship.
There's,
So
there's
actually,
language in there about passing regulations or bylaws to subvert the legislation. So it'd be up to them to determine if tree protection was for the purpose of subverting the legislation.
that's correct, Your Worship. What I'll do, and I'll actually read the specific section if Council may like that, is in Bill 44, I believe it's section 457 here. It specifically does state, 457.1 does state the following powers must not be exercised in a manner that is unreasonable, prohibits or restricts the use of density of use required to be permitted under section 481.3, which is the actual small-scale multi-unit housing. So essentially, the powers under section 488, which is development permit powers, a power in relation to land use regulation, bylaw or land use permits, a power in relation to the heritage alteration permit, and a power under section 614. So to paraphrase, what it's stating is you cannot use any of the powers available to you pursuant to the Local Government Act that relate to a development permit or any land use regulation to unreasonably prohibit or restrict the use of the density that's being prescribed.
So seeing no other questions, I think it'll be great to see the policy manual. Some mayors around the region are calling it our Christmas gift from the province. So we're looking forward to that. What Merry Christmas is going to be for some of us, trying to figure out how we're going to get this done in 6 months, no consultation with anyone. And could you also confirm that the province was consulting with some of our staff, but requiring them to execute an NDA, so they were not allowed to discuss with elected officials what they were consulting on? Is that true?
Your Worship, there has been limited discussions with staff regarding this proposed legislation, and those discussions cannot be disclosed due to NDAs that were executed by staff.
Not even to elected officials?
Your Worship, I'll have to look into that, whether there was any...
Mr. Cooner's going to look into that for us. This is how this government consults with local government on the most dramatic legislation that Councillor Ferguson has seen since he's been elected. This is how the BC NDP conduct themselves. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to move on to item E1, reports to council, the Celebrate Canada grant application. Yep. You would like a point of privilege to have a break, is that correct? So let's resume at 3:30. Okay, thank you. I wanted to get a few items done, but we'll wait. Councillor Ferguson.
Till 3. We have 5 minutes.
Okay, so we'll resume item E1, Celebrate Canada grant application. Get a mover of the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any discussion on E1? Seeing none, call the question on E1. That carries unanimously. Item E2, review of statutory notice advertising methods. Anybody wish to move the recommendation, which is akin to option 2? Ms. Bauer, if I characterize that correctly? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Any discussion on E2? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. I totally appreciate why this is coming forward, and it's absolutely necessary. And I appreciate that we're looking at option 2, where we're considering the paper option continue for now, as long as it exists. Some information that might be helpful for council down the line on this is when I'm looking at some of the analytics around social media, I think it's important that we ensure that when we're looking at follower numbers, that they actually are Township of Langley residents or in proximity. I follow pages that are outside of Langley. So I think it's important to clarify that. I think also to look at impressions. For example, on X, I see a Township of Langley post, and it's saying, I think it said here somewhere that we had several thousand followers on X, formerly known as Twitter, and then only 300 views on the post. So I think it's really important to know if we are achieving what we're trying to with those channels, and recognizing, of course, that social media really comes down to age. Certain people are really into Instagram, certain people are into Facebook, and it tends to be a lot about, I would say, the ages of people. So I just think it would be helpful to have more information to ensure that we actually are going to achieve the target audience that we're looking for. I think, I'll leave it at that. And it's not really any motion or anything formal, but I think it's just something we need to be mindful of when we're pursuing those electronic options.
Okay. Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I really worry when I see stuff like this because, and it mentioned in there that a lot of the local newspapers have gone electronic and not paper. A lot of people, how do I put it, my age and older, still read newspapers and have limited capacity or ability to deal with electronic stuff. A lot of older people don't even own a computer, don't want a computer, and this would severely limit the ability of, how do I refer to myself as elder? People saying, how are they going to get the notice? So I think we should also think about something other than electronic. If our newspaper in the future does go down, how we're going to communicate with older people.
Okay, seeing no discussion, call the question on E2. Carries unanimously. Item E3, Bylaw Enforcement Council Policy Amendment, moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Rent. Councillor Martins, go ahead.
So, and again, like the other one, I fully support what we're trying to do here and the amendments that are being made and the reasons for. I would like to make an amendment after others have spoken with regards to 5.5.9. We're removing a council report from the requirements for with regards to legal action. And so I will, when ready, move an amendment how council can be notified otherwise.
It's a relatively minor amendment. Then you just go ahead and move the amendment.
Sure, if you like. Okay. So I believe I've already provided this wording to staff. So to amend section 5.5.9 to add at the end, an update will be provided to council on the legal action.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Go ahead.
That's really it, just so that we are in the loop and aware of these things are going on, but not requiring a formal report.
Great. Any other question on that? No. Call the question on the amendment to E3. Carries unanimously. So now back to E3 as amended. Anything else, Councillor Martins? No? No. So Councillor Pratt, okay. So with that, seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on E3 as amended. That carries unanimously. Item E4, Salmon River Uplands Rural Plan. I'm going to move the recommendation, but I'm going to change the word. Actually, I'm not going to change it. Nope, that's a different one. So I'm going to move the recommendation. Is there a second? Or seconded by Councillor Bailey. I do have a subsequent motion to this, but is there any discussion on this motion itself? Seeing none, I'll call the question on E4. That carries unanimously. Ms. Bauer, can you bring up the subsequent motion related to this report? So I have a subsequent motion I'd like to move that is could have been an amendment, but I think it's better to do it this way. Council hereby directs staff to bring forward potential draft amendments to the Township of Langley Rural Plan to replace Section 5.7.1 with policies, prerequisites, and considerations with a potential trail network, best practices for development and future growth within the Salmon River uplands as it may be appropriate for Council to consider based on Report to Council 23-243. That is seconded by Councillor Ferguson. That was moved by Mayor Woodward. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none. Oh, no. Okay. Call the question on that motion, E4. That carries unanimously. Item E5, capital request, safe streets. This is the one, Ms. Bauer. I'm going to move that with the word consider change to receive. And then we'll allow that to go to the 2024 budget process. I'll move that. Is there a second or seconded by Councillor Rint? Any discussion on E5? Seeing none, I'll call the question on E5. It carries unanimously. Bylaws for first, second, and third reading. Official Community Plan Amendment, rezoning application number 100278. Bylaw number 59645965. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Pratt. Seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on F1? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Again, not a formal request, but it would be great if staff can consider speaking with the proponent with regards to the intersection at 84th and 206. We have already done some traffic calming there recently in that neighborhood, and I know that there's a lot of children, particularly crossing 84th at 206 to go to Yorkson Middle School. And now that we're finally completing the developments there, we might need to look at upgrading that, the current intersection.
That's something we could definitely look at third if the application gets there. Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, I see that this is a single-family lot subdivision, and in light of today's presentation, I have questions on how we should be approaching this.
Okay, so let's leave that. Why don't I come back to you as part of a deferral motion? Ms. Bauer, can you bring that up, please? Yeah, so I'm going to move. You don't come back. Yeah, so I'm going to move deferral of item F1, that council hereby defer agenda item F1 until regulations are enacted pursuant to proposed housing statutes amendment act 2023. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. So here, it's pretty clear from the presentation today that 28 single-family lots is no longer 28 single-family lots, assuming the legislation is going to be passed. So I think we should wait and get more information, get these regulations, and wait for their legislation to either be deferred, passed, modified. But I think it would be, in my opinion, irresponsible to proceed with this without that information. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I have no opposition to this deferral, but I did want to say now this particular applicant, 100279, now has this being deferred. What would, if I may through the chair, what would be their steps in following through with a decision we've made, if I may?
Mr. Bracken?
I suppose there's really two streams. One stream is to wait to see what comes with the regulations. Flowing from that, if there's no significant changes, would be then to try to either characterize their development to reflect the greater density, or to leave the lots behind and proceed with the original, we'll call it 2/3, and leave the lots for a later date.
Well, yeah, okay. So that would be something staff would sit down with the applicant and perhaps go through options. Thank you very much.
Another option, once the regulations are there, could be to maintain the existing density within an altered form, a density form that is not being disrupted by the province. Yeah, and provide certainty. Yeah. Councillor Kunst?
So what would be wrong with just approving first and second at this point and then let the whatever happens happen? If we were to sort of postpone it, are we not then, I don't know, I'm just.
We're conducting a public hearing that may be for a proposal that would have significantly increased density based on the province. So we'd be conducting a public hearing potentially for no purpose.
So every other first and second, any application that's in, we will now basically postpone that until we hear from the province? Is that?
It'd be if this amendment were to, if this deferral for more information, the regulations is to be adopted by council, I'll be moving it for every application that contains single family. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I'll call the question on that deferral of F1. That carries unanimously. F2, Official Community Plan Amendment Rezoning Application Number 100271, Bylaw Number 59275928. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Any discussion on F2? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if I need to make this an amendment or not, but the point with regards to planning the open house in early December for public input on potential ground level uses and civic opportunities. I think it's valuable that when people are attending that open house, that they have a general understanding of what's contemplated for the upper floors. And I understand that's going to be very high level, but I think it's important that information be available. Do I need to do that by way of an amendment?
What do you think, Mr. Bracken? Would you like an amendment to do that?
We can simply make that notation and include it as part of the open house.
Thank you.
Great. Any other discussion on F2? I want to thank staff for advancing this again as quickly as they have in relation to a number of things that are underway and hopefully seeing this remain a long-term public asset. Item F2. Call the question. That carries unanimously. Item F3, revisions to proposed Williams Neighborhood Plan Update, Bylaw Number 5799. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on F3? No, Councillor Pratt.
So this now proceeds to a public hearing, is that correct?
That's correct. And I believe since council contemplated that the referral motion would trigger a public hearing, that has been tentatively scheduled for December 4th.
December 4th, okay.
Is that correct? That's correct, yeah. Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on F3. That carries unanimously. Bylaws for first, second, and third reading. Fraser Valley Intermunicipal Business License Bylaw Number 59605961. Is there a mover to that? Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on G1? Seeing none, call the question on G1. That carries unanimously. Item G2, Langley Building Bylaw Amendment, Energy Step Code Bylaw Number 5966. Moved by Councillor Van Popta, seconded by Councillor Rent. Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment.
See no other speakers, so yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I believe it should show up at the top there. There we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so this one's pretty important for especially giving the amount of housing that we are authorizing and approving to capture to be as environmentally conscious as we can in regards to our building practices. So this is a big step in that direction. And I think south of the river, we will be the first municipality to hit Step Code 4. So in light of that, the amendment would be to Step Code 4 of the BC Energy Step Code and EL2 of the Zero Carbon Step Code for all applicable Part 9 residential buildings to start on April 1st, 2024. And the second item being Step 4 of the BC Energy Step Code and EL3 of the Zero Carbon Step Code for all applicable Part 9 residential buildings to start on April 1st, 2025. So do it as a gradual increase.
Yeah. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Rent. So go ahead if you wish to discuss it some further.
No, I'm good to go.
Good to go. Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, yes, I just want to double check, and I did just have a discussion with Councillor Van Pop about the opportunity to include, I guess, cooking with natural gas, if I may, through a chair.
Yeah, Mr. Bagan, I believe that can be clarified for Councillor Ferguson.
No, here it
Yep.
goes.
No, it's going to be. Here we go.
Through your worship to Councillor Ferguson, yeah, EL2 and EL3 will allow gas appliances for cooking, fireplaces, that type of stuff. It won't be changed until the township decides to move to EL4.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cesaretti. Appreciate that.
And when does the province have a contemplated timeline to move to EL4 for all of the province?
2030.
2030.
Your worship.
So it's coming eventually, Councillor Ferguson. So yeah. Okay, Councillor Martins.
Yeah, and while you're here, really quickly, I support this initiative and this amendment. I just want to ensure that it's not having an impact on staff because I know in the recommendation in the report, it had said June 30th. So by moving it forward to April 1st, does that have an impact on staff resources or affect your processes?
Your worship to Councillor Martins, no, we'll be fine with that.
Thank you.
It gives us time to have one builders forum to bring it up and let people know about it, but moving to zero net carbon doesn't require air barriers, wall construction. It's basically changing from a gas appliance to electric appliance.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other discussion on the amendment? None, I'll call the question on G2. That carries unanimously. Back to the main motion as amended. Councilor Van Pop, did you have anything further? Nope. Good. So call the question on G2 as amended. That carries unanimously. G3, Council Procedure Bylaw number 5963. So I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on G3? Seeing none, I'll call the question on G3. That carries unanimously. G4, Ice and Dry Arenas Loan Authorization Bylaw, bylaw number 5968. So I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on G4? Seeing none, I'll call the question on G4. That carries unanimously. Rezoning application number 100589, bylaw number 5905. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Rent. Is there seconded by Councillor Pratt? Is there any discussion on G5? So I have Councillor. So I'll move an amendment to G5. Ms. Bauer, if you could bring that up, please. There's an amendment here. So if you could draw your attention to prerequisite number 5. I want to make sure I have this correct. So if staff have any suggestions or considerations, please feel free to raise them. I'll move this amendment that council amend development prerequisite number 5 to add, including a comprehensive trail network concept plan for the Salmon River uplands areas within the vicinity of the proposed development, including adjacent lands awaiting development and connections to south and to north to Williams Park for council to consider for inclusion within the Township of Langley Rural Plan prior to final adoption being considered by council. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I'm curious through yourself to staff, or maybe you can answer this yourself. With the comprehensive trail network being planned as a prerequisite of development approval, does that mean that the proponent would not be able to cut down any trees or affect the site in any way until the plan was actually in place if we give third reading today?
Mr. Richardson, you could answer that.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Councillor Pratt. That's correct. So as included in the development prerequisites are the requirements for dedication of lands, additional tree management plan, and the amendment on the floor speaks to a trail network concept plan. So that would all be completed along with the proponent, our development services staff, as well as our parks design development staff, Your Worship.
And that would all be done prior to fourth and final. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that's correct.
And then at fourth and final, if it was granted at that point, that's when the proponent could then go in and actually start site works?
Through your worship, correct.
Okay, thank you. And then actually, sorry,
Okay.
one more question.
Go
my
ahead,
bad. And the SR3 zone that applies to this site, I believe in its majority, or if not the whole site, once it would be rezoned and subdivided, our SR3 does not allow for secondary suites, correct? It's one dwelling unit per lot?
Through your worship, the township subdivision bylaw, including the SR3 zone, does allow for a second set of cooking facilities, including secondary suites.
Okay.
So they would have a permission of the SR3 zone for a single-family dwelling unit accommodating a secondary suite.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, my understanding is it says in the zoning bylaw that one single-family dwelling, but then the definition of single-family dwelling, there's an allowance for a secondary suite. Is that correct, Mr. Richardson? Yeah,
That's correct, Your
That's
Worship.
correct. That's how it flows. So when you read the zoning bylaw, it says single-family, but you have to look up the definition of single-family to clarify. So I did the same thing. So I'm glad you asked about that question. Any other discussion on this amendment? And then I'll speak to the motion as amended. Seeing none, I'll call the question on this amendment. That carries unanimously. Now back to the main motion as amended. Is there any other speakers? Councillor Pratt, main motion as amended? No. So with that, I want to draw council's attention back to the previous agenda item that we addressed earlier in the meeting under item E4, regarding a request to deal with that section of this rural plan that contemplated more detailed planning and understanding. And so based on that staff report, which outlined that many things have evolved since 1993, I think it's appropriate that we take that into consideration and look for a replacement of that section with the evolution of that framework and have a public hearing on that framework. And if that framework needs to be tweaked or changed or modified, that would inform application G5 prior to it receiving final approval by council. So it's my anticipation that with council were to endorse that amendment and allow this to proceed to wait for final adoption, we would not be seeing this back until we address the rural plan direction. That's why it's embedded in here as a condition. This cannot come back until we consider that plan within the rural plan. And so, Mr. Richardson, I want to make sure that that's your understanding as well, that would be the process.
Correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, so I think what this is doing is saying that there might be some final tweaks to some minor aspects of this plan that we can address at final adoption. But in the meantime, try to elevate the conversation beyond one application to an overall concept for the rural plan, which would involve adjacent lands and other connections. That's a conversation that's been trying to happen within this one application, and I think it's been problematic when the other application is not proceeding, from what I understand. So we should look at a whole area, have public input on that, have a process for that, have the chance for the public to weigh in on the content of the staff report under E4, which outlined a number of things that have changed within the rural plan context since 1993. So that's the intent of the process that I'm bringing to council, to see this application proceed, but only with that conversation regarding the context of the whole rural area. Does that explain where that's coming from? Is there any discussion on the process that we're now voting on? Right? Oh, Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, just one. Do you think the timeline would be for that?
Mr. Backen, I believe that a lot of the background work has been done to produce that report to council, so I was hoping to see that by Q1. Yeah.
January, February would be about right, Your Worship.
Before we have to subvert our entire work plan for the province. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, to that point, I've been pretty adamant this whole time about the need, I think, for a comprehensive update to the rural plan. But in light of what's coming down from on high, I think that this is a reasonable compromise, a reasonable step forward to try and at least come up with a plan for what seems to really matter in that area. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and it's going to be a little while until we still see final adoption.
Councillor Ferguson?
Those of us, if I may, that were involved back a few years ago with the rural plan, we had actually a public hearing at DW Poppy, from what I remember, and a lot of people turned out, and there was a lot of questions asked about that particular plan. And it has served us well for many years, and I agree with other comments from council that now is the time to have another look at it, or even if it's a modified look. And this application was certainly a good idea to start looking at something, and I think we're doing the right thing, so I wanted to thank the mayor and council for coming forward with this. Thank you.
So I want to highlight, just draw council's attention to item 9, condition number 9 on page 10, but follows through to page 11. Securing transfer of approximately 9.9 acres of land to the township. So within the reduction and the change of shape and the flexibility around allowing for some consideration of half-acre lots versus 1-acre lots, the township of Langley, through that process, has had the proponent come forward and volunteer 10 acres of land for tree protection, amounting to preservation of trees of almost 53%, thousands of trees. We hear often about trying to do better for allowing development to proceed while allowing for the preservation of trees and habitat areas. And here we are, I believe, delivering exactly that. And so it would be unfortunate to me to drive by there a few years from now and see 1-acre lots going in with none of the trees being preserved, or a very small number being preserved. That would be disappointing. So while I've received the emails from the communities, I know we all have, the 1-acre lot request, the request for reduction in dwelling units, I sympathize with it, I understand it, and I thought we should elevate that conversation to the rural plan amendment process before we grant final approval to this. And incorporate that for multiple applications, get feedback on the rural plan, and then see if this plan complies with the rural plan. And I'd prefer to see that than say that we're going to revert for lower densities, but see a significant amount of canopy loss. And so for me, it's been a tough one. I think Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Kunst, we were last council, also tried to address this, and it was a tough one. Still is a tough one, and I'm hoping through a slight pause while we get to final adoption for them, potentially, we can have that conversation about the rural plan and then have one last look at this before it advances. So with that, I'll call the question on G5 as amended. It carries unanimously. Bylaws for first, second, third reading and final adoption. I1, bylaw amendment for age-restricted vape stores, bylaw number 5959. Moved by Councillor Kunst, seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any discussion on I1? Seeing none, I'll call the question on I1. That carries unanimously. Bylaws for final adoption, highway closure, dedication, removal, and disposal bylaw number 5926. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Wren. Any discussion on J1? Seeing none, I'll call the question on J1. Carries unanimously. J2, Council Advisory Committee Establishment Bylaw, Amendment Bylaw, bylaw number 5943. Moved by Councillor Wren, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on J2? Seeing none, I'll call the question on J2. That carries unanimously. Items from prior meetings. K1 was removed from the agenda. K2, rezoning application number 100734, bylaw number 5944. Ms. Bauer, this has been reconsidered. As per the community charter, you need a new mover and seconder.
Yes, we do. We're going to go back to the beginning of the motion as it was originally in the agenda.
That's correct. So let's clarify that for council. So that's moved by Councillor Kunst. Is there a seconder to this application? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. So if I could read a statement here very briefly. So I just want to confirm for everyone that this was previously considered by council, and I have used my power as mayor under section 131 of the community charter to return for reconsideration by council the application of Flower Child Research Inc. Under the legislation, council must deal with the matter as soon as convenient, and on the reconsideration, council has the same authority it had in the original consideration of the matter, subject to the same statutory conditions that applied to the original consideration. Council gives the bylaw first reading and refers it to a hearing. Council will have absolute unfettered discretion to consider each reading and adoption in the future. As in the case of all land use applications, there's a hearing. Then each council member must have an open mind to least the extent that they remain amenable to persuasion through the hearing process. So Ms. Bauer, through that, I'm going to amend and refer to grant, move an amendment and refer to grant this first, second reading and refer it to a public hearing. I think I muddled that a little bit, but I think you have that from previous. So we're amending this for first and second and referring for a public hearing. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that amendment and referral. That carries unanimously. Mayor and council report. I'm going to let Councillor Bailey go first. Councillor Bailey, why don't you go ahead?
And your worship, calling the main question? You have called the amendment?
No, I didn't call the, I referred. So Ms. Bauer, maybe clarify, we amend and refer or no?
No, you would need to call the main, you would need to call the main motion as amended.
Okay, all right, so we'll call the, okay, I'm recalling doing it differently in the past, but I'm gonna go watch those meetings now, just to prove that you're always right. Okay, so I'm gonna call the question on K2 as amended. That carries unanimously. I'm gonna move on to Mayor and Council report. Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, so last Thursday till last night, I went over to Victoria to observe the BC-NDP convention. It occurs every 2 years. And the intent there was, since that's my background, was that I'd be able to have access to an awful lot of the people, not only that are making the decisions on Bill 44, 46, and 47, but also other issues like the Minister of Labor, the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Education especially. So I had those discussions. Some of them were a little tense. They were respectful and professional, and pointed out very plainly that what's going on with the provincial government right now is putting us as a municipality in a very difficult situation. An example of that is around 200th Interchange, where we have competing ministers telling us competing directions. And that was received. Also was able to speak to people that can influence policy. And that is, moving in this area is a lot more familiar with me. This is my background is provincial politics. And it was, I was very glad I got over there. I was able to speak to like Minister Fleming, Minister Callan, and a couple other ministers, but also party people that are able to, behind the scenes, direct and influence policy. And I think it's something that we have to be aware of. That is one of the tools that I thought I was bringing to this council, and it was really, really good to be able to get over there. While I enjoy Victoria personally, there wasn't an awful lot of time for sightseeing or anything else there. It was a pretty busy weekend, so thank you very much for allowing me to go over there and interact on behalf of the township.
Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I don't know if I've actually done one of these before, but in light of some news articles that I've been reading the last month, I've been reading them with kind of growing concern, specifically about the approach that Hockey Canada has been using in relation to the BCHL since they left the Hockey Canada umbrella. And I don't know if everybody's paying attention to it, but I think it's relevant, especially in light of how sizable the youth hockey community is here in the township. To me, punishing the junior players who want to maintain their college eligibility is one thing, but the more recent approach that Hockey Canada has been using through the Pacific Coast Amateur Hockey Association, where they urge the kids that and the families of the kids that might otherwise be participating in intermission games or as the seventh skaters during the anthem or going to mini camps, post-game skates, and participating in other community events with member BCHL teams, I think is particularly heartless. I think, what we all are here to do and what we've all participated in as a council so far this term shows how important youth sports are to all of us and how important, especially youth hockey, is to the Langley community. So I'm hopeful that we can have some continued dialogue here through our local, federal, and provincial representatives to put some respectful pressure on the powers that be to make sure that the kids who just want to participate there at a Riverman game can, and that the players who just want to get a college degree or university degree while playing the sport they love actually can, and don't have to suffer because of the disagreements between Hockey Canada and the BCHL. So I just wanted to raise that, and hopefully we can sit down as colleagues and have a conversation about what we can do.
Okay, thank you. Any other mayor and council report. I'm going to come back to you, Councilor Ferguson. You got it quick on the draw there. I'm going to mention last week a pretty significant announcement to have Langley to Haney Place as one of the top 3 corridors designated by the Mayor's Council to be top of the line. There were top of the list. There were 9 corridors competing to be funded and put forward by the Mayor's Council to the province and the federal government. That process has been going on for quite a long time, and a lot of work behind the scenes to get Langley as number 2. And I want to thank all the other mayors in the region that voted to prioritize that corridor along with King George Boulevard and Park Royal to Metrotown. Now, there were lots of other good options, and it'll represent, if it moves forward, it'll represent the single largest investment by any level of government in the Township of Langley ever. Does that be correct, Mr. Becken? I believe it's on the order of $150 million potentially infrastructure upgrade. I don't know if you consider the SkyTrain one quarter of one SkyTrain station to be significant investment, but it would be competitive potentially. So somewhere along there, to see this follow through from TransLink onto 200th Street to the Carville bus exchange is something that will be a big boon for the 200th Street corridor, subject to other considerations of pending legislation. I'll leave it at that. Councilor Ferguson, did you have anything else? Metro, go ahead. Yep. Councilor Ferguson.
I think they're going to put something up on the screen. And don't, whoever runs the camera, don't put the camera at my face. Put it up there. There I am. I'm actually, usually I don't do a picture report, but this is a very important initiative, the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Initiative, EMLI. It was last week in our neighboring community of Abbotsford. And they had, of course, the Minister of, I guess, Agriculture, Pam Alexa was there. The Minister of Energy, Mines, and Climate Change, George Hyman, and Minister Osborne was there. And she was there as well. Okay, so, and also the Mayor of Abbotsford, Mayor Ross Siemens. The reason why I'm pointing this out is the fact that these hydrogen vehicles and involvement with hydrogen that's going to be going on over the next many years, not just in Metro Vancouver or Fraser Valley Regional, but the whole country. Hydrogen is something that they're doing an awful lot of work with, and if anybody remembers the Ballard plants, that they have the fuel cell for hydrogen, which is what this is, a Kenworth truck that runs on hydrogen cell. And we at the Metro Vancouver purchased one. There's other ones going out through the province. And it's, again, an initiative of clean energy. So I wanted to point that out. It's out there. It's large trucks. It's probably an initiative that's the beginning. It's beginning stage. But hydrogen is something that's very, very important now with the environmental issues. So I wanted to point that out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Any other Mayor and Council report, Metro Vancouver report? None. I can move on. Item O, items for information. Does anybody have anything arising from an item for information? Seeing none, I'll move on to motions arising from information. Does anybody wish to move P1? Moved by Councillor Pratt. Seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on P1? Call the question on P1. And that is defeated with Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rint, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Martins, Councillor Van Popta opposed. Q1, other business. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. For this one, I will move it as written and then discuss afterwards.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Martins. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So I think a lot of people are familiar with some of the traffic calming projects that the township will have completed around some school sites and park sites across the community. And the purpose of this motion here is to have a list come forward before council during the next budget cycle, identifying the top 10 high priority traffic calming sites throughout the township. For those of you who might not be aware, there's a master list out there. A lot of projects are on that list. Some of them are tied with each other. And I would love to be able to discuss as a council which of these projects based on some priority measures like making sure that there's an equal level of investment across different neighborhoods, as well as making sure that school and park sites are prioritized is a part of the next budget cycle.
Great, thanks. Any other discussion? Councillor Martins.
Yeah, if I can, through your worship to staff, who maintains this master list that Councillor Parent was talking about, and how do certain locations make that list? If you could maybe provide a bit more information, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, through your worship. The engineering division is currently the bearer of that information. From time to time, regularly, we receive requests from residents, Peter-Tarrant associations, user groups for traffic calming locations. They get added to the list and prioritized and ranked pursuant to the council policy, which includes many factors. And then, subject to the budget process, one, two, or multiple projects are presented to council as part of the budget process and get those constructed. But as Councillor Pratt referenced, we've got well over 100 locations on our list right now.
Sorry, just a follow-up to that information. Thank you, Mr. Zweig. So can you give us an idea of, like, say, this past year's budget, how many locations were brought forward by staff approximately?
Thank you, through your worship. You're asking about how many locations were presented as part of the 2023 budget process. I can't recall if we included any, but I do know through the year we were approved to, I believe, complete 2 or 3 locations. That's just going from memory. Apologize.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you. So I had an amendment. I think, given where we are at the end of November and the council policy for budget timelines, I think there's a middle ground here, which I can discuss when I see if there's a seconder to this. I'd like to move an amendment that we remove the words from discussion to plan. So therefore, be it resolved, the council directs staff to bring forward for council the 10 highest ranked traffic calming projects, so on and so forth. Remove the words discussion as part of budget 2024 and the 5-year financial plan. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rent. So the logic there is simply the lateness of the process to prepare the budget. Staff have been working pretty hard to meet the deadline, put forward by this council to have the bylaw substantially complete for public consultation in December. And so what I think we can do is, if you wish to consider this separately, you could consider during the budget process doing what I did in 2019 budget, which was to add funding for traffic calming with which projects to be determined later on in early next year. So you could have funding potentially in the budget for traffic calming, but determine which locations are proceeded with separately from the budget process itself. So I think it's a bit late to try to put all this together for the budget. I'd be worried it holds it up a little bit. So I think we could separate the two and discuss funding for traffic calming separate from this report, and hopefully this would come back if funding is secured. So that's the rationale. Is there any other discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment to Q1.
And the seconder, your worship?
Was Councillor Wright. That carries unanimously. So back to Q1 as amended. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on Q1. Carries unanimously. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll read out the whereas clauses. Do you want me to do that before or after it's moved?
You should do that before.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right, so addressing the township's parking challenges. Whereas the township of Langley has experienced rapid population growth, which has resulted in parking challenges in many of the township's neighborhoods, and whereas the province of British Columbia has announced legislative changes that could significantly exacerbate the parking challenges in all of the township's neighborhoods, especially without appropriate access to public transportation and active transportation infrastructure, and whereas the provincially mandated elimination of parking minimums within certain developments could add significant stress on the limited space available for street parking across the municipality in neighborhoods that already experience parking challenges. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to include, as part of the transportation and mobility strategy, a review of street parking management best practices, including but not limited to: 1, potential household parking permits on residential-only streets; 2, potential visitor or non-resident parking areas on residential-only streets; and 3, potential demand management solutions for street parking within commercial and mixed-use areas. So moved.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Any other discussion, Councillor Pratt? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think that the reality is we all know that there are significant street parking challenges that currently exist within the township. And I understand that there will be obviously some difficulties in figuring out exactly what to do. But it's my opinion that that shouldn't be a reason for us to stop trying, especially as we're going into a complete overhaul and review of our transportation and mobility strategy. I think that how we use our public right-of-way is a significant part of that strategy. And so I would be hopeful that going into potentially experiencing some significant changes brought on by the province, that we can take a small, albeit I think important, proactive approach.
Any other discussion on Q2? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Just wondering a question, if I can, through the chair to staff. Have we undertaken, when I say we, I mean the Township of Langley, undertaken already any sort of review along this line? Has any research been done on this topic?
Thank you, through your worship. I think in my 13 years here, there have been about 3 reviews completed on some of the parking options for council consideration. Some of these referenced in this council resolution can be revisited and provided with updated information, but any of these tools could be used to address some of the parking challenges we're seeing.
Yeah, so.
Sorry, can I just,
Go
so
ahead.
in order to get that information to bring to the table along with looking at this notice of motion, does that require then a
Yeah.
referral back to staff to?
It does. So I did have a similar line of thought and have a referral ready in that regard.
Okay.
So just in that regard, Mr. Swag, confirm you said 3 reviews. What years do you know? Do you roughly know what years those were?
Thank you, through your worship. I've got 2 in front of me, one from 2017 that was focused on the entire township. One from 2019 focusing, I believe it was in Aldergrove, and I don't have the third one in front of me, but it may have been much older than that.
Okay. So and I believe there was also a review that led to changes of parking requirements in Fort Langley. Yeah. So I think given that, I'm also not clear, because I just haven't had a chance to ask, I'm not clear if including it or mandating to include it within the transportation and mobility strategy review or update is the right place for this. I just don't know that. So, but I certainly don't have any problem with it in theory. So I was going to make a referral back to staff for a report on whether or not the transportation and mobility strategy is the right location for this review, and to also provide all previous reviews to council within the last 10 years to help inform a decision on this motion. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on that referral? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the referral of Q2. That carries unanimously. Councillor Martins. Go ahead.
Is this for the?
This is for item Q3.
Q3, perfect,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, so notice the motion here, I referred to it earlier. If I can read it out first. Okay, so with regard to catalytic converter theft prevention, whereas catalytic converters contain a small amount of precious metals which have increased in price over time and have a high resale value, resulting in significant theft across the region. ICBC reports that claims for catalytic converter thefts in BC have climbed from 89 to 1,953 in a 5-year period beginning in 2017. Limiting the manner in which a scrap metal dealer can purchase a catalytic converter is an effective approach to curtail catalytic converter theft, as it reduces the financial incentive. And the mechanism for curtailing catalytic converter theft must ensure that the legitimate sale and resale of catalytic converters is not impacted. Therefore, be it resolved that Council hereby directs staff to collaborate with the RCMP and ICBC to explore potential initiatives to curb catalytic converter theft in the Township of Langley and report to Council with options to consider.
There's a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Any discussion?
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I may. Referring back to earlier in our meeting, we had a presentation from Superintendent Marsden from the Langley Detachment. And some of the stats that he produced on page 2, property crime trends. Theft from vehicle reports in total in the last quarter were 302. In the city, that there was 74 incidents. In the township, 228. And according to their data, 99% of this crime category include catalytic converter thefts, which, as we know, are an ongoing issue across the Lower Mainland. Other municipalities, such as Surrey, are looking at a more robust approach that brings different people to the table to address this. It's not as simple as strictly enforcement. So I want the Township of Langley to be part of that solution. If that means perhaps we need to look at reviewing our bylaws that might be applicable and making amendments, or engaging our bylaw staff, our enforcement staff, in assisting with the efforts, however that might look. And that's the intent of this motion. I think it's really important. We've got a crime epidemic on our hands across the region, and we need to roll up our sleeves and figure out how to resolve it.
Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, I appreciate this motion. In light of hearing what our presentation had today from Superintendent Marsden, he was talking, and it was just brought up, that City of Surrey has done extensive work in this department as well. So I was just going to add maybe an amendment just to include, after RCMP and ICBC, to include and other municipalities, so that we can have maybe a regional approach to it, or at least understanding of what everybody else is doing or trying to do.
So just walk me through that again.
So just make an amendment.
There's no other speakers, so you can go ahead and do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So to amend, therefore be it resolved that council hereby directs staff to collaborate with the RCMP and ICBC and neighboring municipalities to explore potential initiatives to curb catalytic converter.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on that amendment, Councillor Van Popta?
Sorry?
You have anything else on that?
I just think it's, if somebody else is, based on the presentation we had today, that there's some success in the approach that Surrey is doing. So I think, if we don't need to reinvent the wheel, if we can collect some of their information. And so it's just an extra piece to add to it.
Great. Okay. Councillor Martins?
Thank you. Just a point of clarification on why I didn't include other municipalities here is because I'm not asking that our staff be the lead on this initiative. It's actually being led by ICBC and the RCMP, and they are already working very closely with other municipalities and trying to do a coordinated effort, recognizing it's a regional issue. So my concern is the amendment might cause some confusion for staff as to who it is they're supposed to be liaising with, because the information has already been received with the people who are already working on it, those other two entities. About how it looks across the region. And I don't want to create confusion by this. I just want to ensure that we're engaged with what's happening locally. So. Okay.
Any other discussion on the amendment? We all clear what the amendment is? Okay, so I'll call the question on the amendment. Oh, I glanced and your name's not there, and all of a sudden it's there. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
If I may, through the chair.
On the amendment, right?
On the amendment, Councillor Martin asked a question: would having a copy or looking at Surrey's bylaw cause any challenges with going through with this motion? If I may, through the chair.
Mr. Bracken, do you see any challenges with the amendment?
Not particularly, Your Worship. I'm just reflecting on it. I think it's workable if it meets the spirit and intent of the original motion. I guess that's the question for council. Is this changing or altering the original intent?
So that would be my question to you, Mr. Mayor. Is this changing or altering the motion?
I look at the amendment, and it's directing staff to collaborate with the RCMP and and ICBC. See no harm in calling a couple other municipalities and see if they have other ideas to consider. That's just my thought, but maybe again, Councillor Martins could clarify that.
Okay,
that's how I viewed it. There seems to be no harm in calling Surrey or calling a few other people and seeing what's been successful. Councillor Martins?
Yeah, I'm mindful of staff resources, and as I mentioned, the work's already been done by the RCMP, and so we're asking staff to duplicate work already being done, and that's my concern. That information will come out if our staff are working with RCMP and ICBC. I know as Superintendent Marsden mentioned in his presentation, he's already been looking at the Surrey bylaw. So I don't think our staff need to be doing a regional analysis of this problem. It's already happening. And I just want our staff to come to the table for how we can support what's already going on. And so I don't support the amendment, and to me, it's actually not in the spirit of the amendment. We're being a supportive arm to these two agencies. We're not taking the lead.
Okay. Councillor Van Popta?
We're asking staff to collaborate with the RCMP and ICBC. So we're not asking them to take the charge on formulating any bylaws, which is why I wanted to add that piece in. What collaborate looks like or speaks to is vague. So I think adding that extra piece in there as an assurance that we are looking at other neighboring municipalities is warranted. And that's all I got to say.
Okay. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on the amendment to Q3. That carries. Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Councillor Martin's opposed. Now back to the main motion as amended. Is anything else? So Q3, no other discussion. I'll call the question on Q3 as amended. You can speak again if you wish. Want me to cancel it?
Yeah, I
Okay.
did want to speak.
Okay. So Councillor Martins, go ahead. On the
Yeah.
main motion as amended.
So the main motion is now directing staff to do a review across the region of other bylaws, and we're getting into the weeds on that information. Is that correct? Because that was not at all the spirit of this motion.
Mr. Bragan, do you interpret it that way, or could it just be literally be just a couple of calls to Surrey and Abbotsford and gather some information? I think it would be up to SMT to sort of determine in the scope.
We can take this information and try to interpret it, Your Worship, in terms of how the breadth and width of it. I guess it really depends upon the intent of the mover of the amendment in terms of what the width and breadth was of the consultation.
I think it could be like, maybe read it back, Ms. Bauer. I think it could literally just be a call to Surrey or Abbotsford. Any ideas? If not, that could be the wrap it up.
The intent of as I understand it, when we wrote it here, is that we were adding after RCMP and ICBC and neighboring municipalities.
Yeah, that could literally be 3 municipalities. I'm not sure it's a regional. I think it would, I mean, when I voted in favor, I just see it as just a couple of calls. Like hopefully it would be limited to that by Mr. Bracken and his team. Seeing no other, you good? Any other discussion? That, I'll call the question on Q3 as amended. That carries unanimously. Is there any other business? Councillor Martins.
Yes, I do. Arising from the delegation from Sarah Beauvais today regarding the tree removal permit, I've sent wording over to staff there. I hope you have it for a motion that we could refer this information to staff for a report showing the application and provide the arborist report and recommendations that staff may have that may be appropriate for council to consider.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Kunst. Speak to it any further? No. Any other speakers on the referral? Seeing none, I'll call the question on Q4. That carries with Councillor Van Popta opposed. Is there any other discussion, any other business? No. Seeing none, get a motion to resolve into special close. Anybody have any items? No. Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Martins. Call the question. Any those in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried. Get a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Kuntz, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Those in favor, opposed, and carried. Thank you.